She was left behind in a cold, crumbling castle, with no power, no allies, and no husband. Everyone expected her to disappear, but what she built in his absence, no one could have imagined. This is a story of resilience, strategy, and a love that defied time. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this reading. The biting fog hung over the stone towers of Blackmere Castle like a shroud, obscuring the boundaries between earth and sky. Lady Elisande stood motionless at the window of her chambers, her slender fingers gripping the cold stone sill until her knuckles turned white. The messenger's words still echoed in her mind, cutting deeper than any blade ever could. "My lady, there is no gentle way to deliver such news. Sir Ronar has vanished during the campaign. No word, no body recovered. The army has returned without him. Her husband of 3 years, gone. Not even the dignity of a confirmed death. Just absence, disappearance, abandonment." Elisande's reflection stared back at her from the window pane. A woman of 38 winters with chestnut hair pulled severely back, high cheekbones that had once been called beautiful, and eyes that betrayed nothing of the storm raging within. She had been the daughter of a disgraced Saxon count, married, off to secure an alliance with the northern territories. Sir Ronar, a warrior noble known for his brutality on the battlefield and his coldness at home, had accepted her as one might accept a parcel of land, a political necessity, nothing more. Their marriage had been a hollow thing, built on duty rather than affection. No children had blessed their union. No true companionship had blossomed between them. Yet despite this, his absence created a void she could not ignore. Not because she mourned him as a loving wife, but because without him she was nothing in the eyes of the world. A childless widow, if she could even claim that title without proof of his death, with no allies, no army, and no strong name to protect her. The servants whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. They gave her months, perhaps weeks, before she would be forced to abandon Blackmere and return in disgrace to what remained of her family. The neighboring lords circled like vultures, eyeing the castle and its lands. Everyone was waiting for her to disappear. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Elisande composed herself, straightening her back and smoothing the front of her dark blue gown. "Enter," she commanded, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. Merrick, the castle steward, bowed low as he entered. An older man who had served 3 generations of Ronar's family. His loyalty had always been to the bloodline, not to the foreign bride who had come to their shores. "My lady, the household staff awaits your instructions regarding the current situation." The hesitation in his voice was unmistakable. He didn't believe she had the strength to lead. None of them did. But in that moment, something shifted within Elisande. Where there should have been despair, a quiet flame kindled instead. She would not weep. She would not beg. She would not fade away as everyone expected. "Tell me, Merrick," she said, her voice cool and measured. "How many men remain?" "Loyal to Blackmere?" The steward blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Perhaps 20 guards, my lady. Most followed Sir Ronar to war and did not return. And our resources? Grain stores? Gold? Meager, my lady. The last harvest was poor, and the campaign drained much of the treasury." Elisande nodded, absorbing this information without flinching. "And the villages under our protection. How many souls look to Blackmere for justice and defense?" 7 villages, perhaps 400 people in total," Merrick replied, his brow furrowing. "But my lady, surely you don't intend to—" "I intend to rule, Merrick," she interrupted, her eyes flashing with sudden fire. "Not as a caretaker awaiting a husband's return, not as a widow begging for charity, but as the Lady of Blackmere in my own right." The steward's mouth opened and closed, fish-like in his astonishment. "The neighboring lords will never accept. I'm not asking for their acceptance," Elisande said, walking past him toward the great hall. "I am demanding their respect, and if I cannot have that, I will earn their fear. The great hall of Blackmere Castle was a shadow of its former glory. Tattered banners hung from the rafters. Dust gathered in corners, and the massive oak table sat mostly empty where once it had accommodated dozens of knights and nobles. Elisande walked the length of it, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space until she reached the Lord's chair, a seat she had never occupied before. For a moment she hesitated, her hand hovering over the carved wooden back. Then, with deliberate slowness, she sat down, her spine straight, her chin lifted. The few servants present stopped their work to stare, shock evident on their faces. "Merrick," she called, her voice ringing through the hall. "Summon the captain of the guard, the master of the hunt, and the village elders. We have much to discuss." As the steward hurried to obey, Elisande allowed herself one private moment of doubt. She had been raised to be a nobleman's wife, not a ruler. Her education had included music, poetry, and the management of a household, not war, politics, or the harsh realities of northern justice. Yet she had also watched, silently and carefully, as her father navigated the treacherous waters of court before his fall from grace. She had observed Ronar as he commanded men and dispensed judgments. She had learned more than anyone suspected, and she had no choice. Surrender meant destruction. Hours later, as dusk settled over the castle, a messenger burst into the hall where Elisande was still holding council with her hastily assembled advisers. "Raiders, my lady," the young man gasped, his face pale with terror. "They attacked the village of Oakvale, 30 men at least burning and looting." The captain of the guard, a grizzled veteran named Thorn, looked to Elisande with resignation. "We cannot defend against such numbers, my lady. We have but 6 archers and a handful of men-at-arms." The room fell silent, all eyes on the woman seated in the Lord's chair. This was the moment they expected her to falter, to reveal the weakness they all presumed lay beneath her composed exterior. Instead, Elisande rose to her feet, her decision already made. "Captain Thorn, gather your archers. Master Hewitt, arm every man who can hold a bow. I will not abandon our people to slaughter." "My lady," Thorn protested, "you cannot mean to face raiders with such meager forces." "I do not intend to engage them in open battle, Captain," she replied, her mind racing ahead, forming a strategy. "We will strike from the forest edge, using the darkness and our knowledge of the land. Hit them hard and withdraw again and again until they believe they face a much larger force." As she spoke, Elisande moved to the wall where ceremonial weapons hung, selecting a slender dagger that she concealed within the folds of her gown. "And I will lead this defense myself." The shocked silence that followed was broken by the sound of the great hall doors swinging open. A stable boy rushed in, already leading Elisande's mare, saddled and ready. The animal sensed the tension in the air, its nostrils flaring as it pawed at the stone floor. Within the hour, Elisande rode at the head of a small, determined band toward the burning village of Oakvale. The night air filled her lungs, sharp, with the scent of frost and smoke. Fear churned in her stomach, but she allowed none of it to show on her face or in the steadiness of her hands on the reins. The defense of Oakvale would become the first legend in what would grow to be many. How Lady Elisande, with only 6 archers and a handful of determined men, drove back raiders 3 times their number through cunning and courage. How she personally led each strike from the shadows, her voice clear and commanding even in the chaos of battle. How, when dawn broke, the surviving raiders fled, spreading word of a northern witch queen who commanded shadows and struck like lightning. But what the people of Oakvale remembered most clearly was the image of Elisande afterward, standing amid the smoldering remains of their homes, her fine gown smudged with soot and a single streak of blood across her cheek where a raider's blade had nearly found its mark. "You will rebuild," she told them, her voice carrying to every survivor gathered around her. "And Blackmere will provide protection, now and always, in return for your loyalty. This I swear, as your lady." As she spoke these words, something changed. In the eyes of the villagers, where before there had been pity for the abandoned wife, now there was reverence. Where there had been doubt, now there was belief. And in that moment, Watching the shifting expressions of the people before her, Elisande understood what she had become. Not just a caretaker of a crumbling castle, but the beginning of a legend. A woman alone, a lady of war rising from the ashes of abandonment, the birth of a queen. 5 years had transformed Blackmere beyond recognition. What had once been a forgotten northern outpost, crumbling and desolate, now stood as the jewel of the borderlands. The stone walls gleamed with fresh mortar, strengthened and expanded, under Lady Elisande's watchful eye. Fields once fallow now burst with golden wheat and barley, tended by farmers who worked with renewed purpose. The forge rang day and night with the sound of hammers shaping not just plowshares, but swords and shields bearing the new emblem of Blackmere, a phoenix rising from darkness. Elisande stood on the battlements, her breath creating small clouds in the crisp morning air. At 43, time had only enhanced her presence. Her chestnut hair, now threaded with strands of silver at the temples, was braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. Her blue gown, practical yet elegant, bore subtle embroidery at the sleeves, the handiwork of village women grateful for her protection. A slender circlet of burnished bronze rested on her brow, not a crown in name, but recognized as such by all who served her. "The harvest reports, my lady," said Merrick, approaching with a leather-bound ledger. The old steward had aged considerably since Sir Ronar's disappearance, yet his back remained straight, his loyalty to Blackmere and its lady now unquestionable. "And how do we fare this season?" Elisande asked, though she already knew the answer. She made it her business to know everything about her domain, from the yield of the farthest field to the health of the newest babe born within her walls. "Exceedingly well," Merrick replied, a rare smile softening his weathered features. "We'll have grain to spare for trade, and the new granaries you commissioned will ensure we weather even the harshest winter." Elisande nodded, satisfaction warming her despite the chill air. "And the training of the new guardsmen?" "Captain Thorne reports they show promise. 20 fresh recruits from the villages, eager to serve." This, too, was part of her grand design. In the 5 years since Ronar's disappearance, Elisande had built not just walls and granaries, but a network of loyalties that extended far beyond Blackmere's immediate holdings. 7 villages had grown to 12 under her protection. Small lords who had once looked down upon the abandoned wife now sought alliances, offering their sons as guards, their daughters as ladies-in-waiting, their goods for trade. She had created a code of justice that was stern but fair, holding court twice monthly to hear petitions and settle disputes. Unlike many nobles who favored their own class, Elisande listened to peasant and merchant with equal attention. Her judgments became legendary for their wisdom and equity. "The preparations for the autumn tournament are underway," Merrick continued, turning a page in his ledger. "Lords from as far as Ravenscroft have indicated their intent to participate." The tournament had been Elisande's most audacious innovation. Breaking with tradition, she had opened competition not just to nobles, but to any man or woman who showed skill at arms. The prize was not a meaningless ribbon or fleeting title, but gold, enough to change a common family's fortunes. It brought talent to Blackmere and cemented her reputation as a patron of merit rather than birth. "Excellent," she replied. "Ensure that accommodations are prepared for all guests, and double the guard during the festivities. I will not have our hospitality marred by drunken brawls or thievery." As Merrick bowed and departed, Elisande remained on the battlements, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon where the morning mist obscured the boundaries of her domain. For all her achievements, for all the respect she had earned, there were still moments, private, fleeting, when the weight of solitude pressed upon her heart. In the quiet of her chambers at night, dreams of Ronar sometimes came unbidden. Not the cold, distant husband she had known, but a shadow of what might have been. She would wake with an inexplicable sense of loss, reaching across empty sheets before remembering herself. "My lady?" A soft voice interrupted her reverie. Elisande turned to find Elara, her personal handmaiden, standing respectfully a few paces away. The girl had been a skinny, frightened thing when Elisande had rescued her from a brutal master 5 years ago. Now she stood tall and confident, her keen intelligence making her one of Elisand's most trusted confidants despite her youth. "The council awaits in the great hall," Ilara reminded her. Elisand nodded, pushing aside her moment of melancholy. "Of course, let us not keep them waiting." The great hall of Blackmere, once echoing and empty, now hummed with activity. A long oak table, polished to a rich gleam, had replaced the scarred old one. Around it sat the men and women who formed Elisand's inner circle. Captain Thorne, now commander of her growing forces, Master Hewitt, whose knowledge of hunting grounds had expanded to include mapping of territories beyond Blackmere, Lady Margaret, a widow whose skill with herbs and medicine had saved countless lives, and 3 others of similar capability and loyalty. "My friends," Elisand greeted them, taking her seat at the head of the table. "What matters require our attention. Today, Commander Thorne spoke first, his gruff voice carrying the weight of concerning news. Bandits grow bold in the eastern forest, my lady. 3 merchants robbed in the past fortnight. How many men do you need to hunt them down?" Elisand asked, without hesitation. "A dozen should suffice. I've identified their likely camp." "You have them. See it done by week's end." Her decisiveness had become a hallmark of her rule. No wavering, no unnecessary deliberation when action was required. "Lady," Margaret spoke next, "the fever in Oakvale has subsided. Your order to isolate the sick and provide clean water saved many lives." Elisand nodded her acknowledgement. "And the orphans from the outbreak? Placed with willing families or brought to the castle as you instructed. The youngest, a girl of 4, shows remarkable aptitude with letters. Master Edwin believes she could be trained as a scribe." "Then she shall have that opportunity," Elisand declared. "Talent must not be wasted regardless of birth." The meeting continued in this vein, each advisor reporting, each issue addressed with the same blend of pragmatism and compassion that had become the foundation of Elisand's rule. As the council dispersed, she remained seated, reviewing the maps and documents before her with careful attention. "You've built something remarkable here," came a voice from the doorway. Elisand looked up to see Father Thomas, the elderly priest who served the castle chapel. Unlike many of his brethren who viewed female authority with suspicion, Father Thomas had become one of her strongest supporters. "I've done what was necessary," she replied, offering him a rare smile. The old man's eyes twinkled as he approached. "Necessity may have been the mother, but vision was the father of this creation. Few would have seen possibility where you did." Elisand gestured for him to sit. Though not officially part of her council, the priest's wisdom had guided many of her decisions. "I still have doubts, Thomas," she admitted quietly, a confession she would make to no other. "There are those in the king's court who view my independence as dangerous, a woman ruling in her own right, not as regent for a son or in the name of a husband. They fear what they cannot control," Father Thomas said simply. "But you have given your people justice and prosperity. The king is distant, concerned with grander matters than our borderlands. As long as you acknowledge his sovereignty and pay the royal taxes, practical men will advise him to leave well enough alone." Elisand was not so certain, but she kept her counsel. "The tournament begins tomorrow. Will you offer the blessing?" "With gladness," he replied, rising slowly, his joints clearly paining him. "Though I fear my old bones will not allow me to enjoy much of the competition. We shall have a comfortable chair placed for you," she promised, with the best view of the field. The following day dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the tournament. The fields beyond Blackmere's walls had been transformed overnight. Colorful pavilions dotted the landscape, pennants snapping in the breeze. Merchants had set up stalls selling everything from spiced wine to fine daggers. Children darted between the legs of adults, their excitement palpable. Elisand presided from a raised dais, dressed in her finest, a gown of deep burgundy velvet with sleeves lined in silver fox fur, the circlet gleaming on her brow. To the assembled crowd, she appeared, every inch a queen, her bearing regal, her gaze steady and assured. Yet, as the competitions began, archery first, followed by swordplay and horseback skills, Her attention was drawn to a figure at the edge of the gathering. A tall man, his face obscured by a deep hood, observing from the shadow of an ancient oak. Something in his stance, the set of his shoulders, stirred a memory she could not quite grasp. When he turned and disappeared into the crowd, Elisande felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Shaking off the sensation, she returned her focus to the tournament, applauding as a blacksmith's son bested a nobleman's heir in archery. That evening, as torches illuminated the castle courtyard and music filled the air, Elisande moved among her guests with practiced grace. Lords who had once scorned her now bowed deeply in respect. Ladies who had pitied her now sought her favor. She accepted their deference with the same equanimity with which she had endured their earlier disdain. "A magnificent showing, Lady Elisande," declared Lord Hartwell, a minor noble whose lands bordered hers to the west. "Though I must confess, some find your methods unconventional." "Unconventional times call for unconventional methods, my lord," she replied smoothly. "And I find that rewarding skill rather than status builds a stronger realm." "Indeed," he murmured, his tone suggesting he was not entirely convinced. "One wonders what Sir Ronar would think of these innovations." The mention of her husband's name was clearly intended to unsettle her, to remind her of her precarious position as a woman whose power stemmed from a marriage to a man now long absent. Instead, Elisande merely smiled, a cool curve of her lips that did not reach her eyes. "One wonders many things, Lord Hartwell. What Sir Ronar would think, what the future holds, whether next year's tournament might see your son competing against a blacksmith's daughter." She took a deliberate sip of wine. Life is full of such fascinating uncertainties. As the nobleman sputtered a response, Elisande's attention was drawn once more to the periphery of the celebration. There again was the hooded figure, watching from the shadows. This time she was certain he was observing her specifically, his hidden gaze following her movements with unsettling intensity. When a group of revelers passed between them, momentarily blocking her view, the stranger vanished once more. But Elisande knew, with an instinct honed by years of survival against the odds, that this was not the last she would see of him. Someone was watching Blackmere, watching her, and something in her blood, in the deepest chambers of her heart, whispered that the past was not as dead as she had believed. The council chamber crackled with tension as Commander Thorne unrolled a weathered map across the oak table. His weathered finger traced a line along the southern territories, stopping at several marked locations. "Confirmed reports, my lady. The southern clans are mobilizing. Ravenshire, Dunwich, and Greymore have formed an alliance." Thorne's voice was grave, his eyes meeting Elisande's with unvarnished concern. Their combined forces could field nearly 500 men. Elisande studied the map, her expression betraying nothing of the cold dread settling in her stomach. 500 trained soldiers against Blackmere's modest force of 60 guards and perhaps 200 village militia. The odds were grim by any measure. "And their purpose?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Lady Margaret, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, spoke with characteristic bluntness. "They call you a usurper, my lady. A woman who has overstepped her proper place. They mean to bring you to heel," added Master Edwin, the court scribe, "or remove you entirely." A heavy silence descended upon the room. Elisande felt the weight of their gazes, not doubtful, not any more, but concerned. These advisors who had stood by her side as she transformed Blackmere from forgotten outpost to prosperous territory now feared for all they had built together. "We should petition the crown for protection," suggested Lord Asher, the newest member of her council, a minor noble who had pledged fealty to Blackmere just last winter. "The king would not wish to see established borders disrupted." Elisande's laugh was soft, but without humor. "The king's court has been whispering against me for years, Lord Asher. They see a woman ruling independently as a dangerous precedent." She straightened, squaring her shoulders. "No, we will not beg for protection from those who have long wished for my downfall." "Then what would you have us do, my lady?" Thorne asked, his hand unconsciously moving to the hilt of his sword. "We cannot match their numbers in open battle." Elisande rose from her seat, moving to the narrow window that overlooked the castle courtyard. Below, life continued, unaware of the threat gathering on the horizon. Blacksmiths hammered at their forges, children darted between market stalls, guards patrolled with measured steps. Her people, her responsibility. "We have built Blackmere's strength not on numbers, but on loyalty," she said, turning back to her council. "Every village under our protection, every family that has found justice and prosperity within our borders, these are our true defenses." She returned to the table, placing her palms flat on the map. "Commander Thorn, I want messengers sent to every settlement within our influence. We will call upon those who have benefited from Blackmere's protection to stand with us now." "A militia, my lady?" Thorn's eyebrows rose. "Farmers and blacksmiths against trained soldiers?" "Not just a militia," Elisande corrected. "An army bound by conviction rather than coin, and we will not meet them as they expect. Blackmere's terrain favors the defender. Narrow passes, dense forests, ground we know intimately, and they do not." She traced her own route on the map, outlining a strategy that made Thorn's eyes widen with grudging admiration. "It is bold, my lady," he admitted. "It could work." "See to the messengers immediately," she commanded. "Lady Margaret, we will need healing supplies in abundance. Master Edwin, draft a declaration to be read in every village square. I want our people to understand what we fight for." As the council dispersed to their tasks, Elisande remained, studying the map with narrowed eyes. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it since the moment she decided to rule rather than retreat. Yet now that the threat loomed, tangible and immediate, she felt the weight of responsibility like a physical burden across her shoulders. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ilara entered, her expression troubled. "My lady, there is a situation in the eastern village. Harlow's mill is burning." Within the hour, Elisande rode at the head of a small contingent toward the plume of black smoke rising on the horizon. The journey was tense, each rider acutely aware that this fire might not be accidental, perhaps the first strike from their southern enemies. As they crested the final hill overlooking Harlow's mill, the devastation became clear. Several buildings were engulfed in flames, villagers forming desperate bucket chains from the river. Screams and shouts carried on the wind. "Secure the perimeter," Elisande ordered Thorn. "This may be a trap to draw us out." Caution, however, gave way to urgency when a woman's anguished cry cut through the chaos. "My child, my daughter is still inside." Without hesitation, Elisande dismounted, ignoring Thorn's protests. The burning structure was a grain storage, its wooden beams already half consumed by hungry flames. Smoke billowed from the doorway, acrid and thick. "Where is she?" Elisande demanded, approaching the distraught mother. "The loft," the woman sobbed, pointing upward. "She hides there when frightened. I cannot reach her." Elisande glanced at the building, calculating. The main floor was impassable, flames having claimed the entire entrance. But a narrow window on the upper level remained untouched by fire. "Rope," she commanded, and one of her guards hastily provided a coil from his saddle. With quick, practiced movements, she secured it around her waist. "My lady, you cannot," Thorn began, but Elisande silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. "I will not abandon a child to flames," she stated, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had built a kingdom from ruins. What followed would become another chapter in the growing legend of Lady Elisande. How she scaled the burning, building from the outside, using footholds in the rough stone wall. How she broke through the window with her own cloak-wrapped arm, disappearing into the smoke. How, moments before the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber, she emerged with a small, soot-covered figure clutched to her chest. As she handed the child, miraculously unharmed, to her weeping mother, Elisande noticed something that froze her blood colder than any strategic threat. Near the base of the grain storage, partially revealed by falling debris, was an iron container of lamp oil, and beside it, a discarded torch too deliberately placed to be accidental. This was no accident, she said quietly to Thorn, who had rushed to her side. This was an attack. The commander's face darkened with rage. "Mercenaries," he growled, pointing to distinctive boot prints in the mud nearby. Hired daggers from the southern plains. Elisande surveyed the damage, her mind racing ahead to implications and responses. The Southern Alliance had struck first, targeting not military defenses but the livelihood of her people, their food stores, their sense of security. "Double the patrols on all borders," she ordered, "and accelerate our preparations. They will not find us unprepared when they march in force." As her guards organized the village defense and aid for the injured, Elisande approached the family whose child she had rescued. The little girl, no more than 6 years old, stared up at her with wide, awestruck eyes. "You're the lady from the castle," the child whispered. "Mother says you're stronger than any king." Despite the gravity of the situation, Elisande felt her, lips curve in a genuine smile. Not stronger, perhaps, just more determined. She knelt to the child's level. "What is your name, brave one?" "Lily, my lady." "Well, Lily, I want you to remember something. Our strength isn't in our walls or our weapons. It's in our hearts and our minds." She touched the girl's chest gently, "and in how we care for one another." As twilight descended and the last embers of the fire were extinguished, Elisande prepared to return to Blackmere. The village was secure, the injured tended to, temporary shelters arranged for those who had lost homes. "My lady," called Alara, approaching with a sealed parchment in hand. "This arrived at the castle during your absence. The messenger insisted it was for your eyes alone." Elisande took the letter, noting the absence of any family seal or official mark. Breaking the plain wax seal, she unfolded the parchment and felt her heart stutter in her chest at the words written in a painfully familiar hand. "The wolves circle, little fox. But they do not know your teeth as I do." Only one person had ever called her that, little fox, a private endearment whispered in rare moments of tenderness. Ronar Elisande's hands trembled, a reaction she had not allowed herself even when facing the burning building. The handwriting, the turn of phrase, the reference to an intimacy known only to husband and wife. It could not be coincidence. "My lady," Ilara's concerned voice pulled her from her shocked reverie. "Is it ill news?" Composing herself with effort, Elisande carefully refolded the parchment and tucked it into her sleeve. "Not ill, necessarily, but unsettling." She looked toward the horizon, where stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "We ride for Blackmere now. There is much to prepare." The journey back to the castle was cloaked in shadows and silence, each rider lost in thought after the day's events. For Elisande, however, the silence roared with questions. If Ronar lived, if he had somehow returned after 5 years of absence, why reveal himself through cryptic notes rather than present himself openly? What game was he playing? And most troublingly, how did he know of the southern threat? As they passed through the edge of the forest that bordered Blackmere's northern approach, Elisande felt a distinct prickle of awareness, the sensation of being watched. Slowing her horse slightly, she scanned the trees, seeking any movement in the darkness. For the briefest moment she glimpsed a figure among the ancient oaks. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by shadow but his stance unmistakably military. The same hooded observer from the tournament. Before she could signal her guards, he melted back into the forest, leaving only disturbed foliage as evidence he had been there at all. Elisande urged her mount forward, suddenly eager for the safety of Blackmere's walls. Not out of fear for herself, but from a desperate need to organize her thoughts, to plan her next move in what had suddenly become a far more complex game than a simple defense against southern aggression. If Ronar had returned, everything changed. The legal basis of her authority, the alliances she had carefully cultivated, the very future she had built with such determination, all hung in precarious balance. That night, in the solitude of her chambers, once his chambers, then hers alone, now caught in an uncertain limbo, Elisande stood at the window, the mysterious parchment spread before her. Outside, Blackmere slept, unaware that its lady faced not one threat but two, an army gathering in the south, and a ghost emerging from the past. In the courtyard below, a single figure crossed the moonlit stones, the hooded man again, walking, with the confidence of one who belonged. As he passed beneath a torch, his hood fell back momentarily, revealing a profile marked by a jagged scar that had not been there 5 years ago, but with features Elisande would have recognized in the darkest night. Ronar had returned, and with him came a storm that would test everything she had built. The great hall of Blackmere fell silent as the massive oak doors swung open. Elisande sat motionless on the carved chair that had become her throne, her expression a carefully composed mask that betrayed nothing of the storm raging within her. The morning light filtered through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, suddenly frozen, like time itself, as a solitary figure stepped into the hall. Sir Ronar of Blackmere walked with the measured stride of a warrior, though his gait now carried the slightest hint of unevenness, as if favoring his right leg. 5 years had transformed him. The man who had left was in his prime at 40, broad-shouldered and imposing. The man who returned at 45 seemed both older and harder, his once black hair now streaked with silver, his face weathered and marked by a jagged scar that ran from his right temple to the edge of his beard. His clothes were those of a common traveler, stained with road dust and wear, yet he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of nobility. As he approached the dais, the gathered council members and servants pressed back against the walls, creating a path that felt more like a chasm between husband and wife. Whispers rippled through the hall, some disbelieving, others fearful. For many of the younger servants, this man was merely a name, a shadow from their lady's past. For the older retainers, his appearance was nothing short of resurrection. Ronar stopped a respectful distance from the dais, his storm-gray eyes meeting Elisande's amber ones without flinching. For a long moment neither spoke, the weight of 5 years of absence hanging between them like an unsheathed blade. "My lady wife," he finally said, his voice deeper than she remembered, roughened by time or hardship or both. "I returned to Blackmere." Simple words, inadequate words for the magnitude of his disappearance and reappearance. Elisande felt anger surge within her, hot and bright as forge fire, but kept it carefully banked behind a facade of cool dignity. "Sir Ronar," she replied, her tone neutral, giving no hint of the turmoil beneath. "We had thought you dead." A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign her words had struck home. "There were times when I nearly was." He took another step forward and she noticed more details. A slight stiffness to his left hand, as if the fingers did not fully straighten. A hollowness to his cheeks that spoke of prolonged hunger. A wariness in his eyes that had not been there before. "You appear before us as a ghost," Elisande continued, deliberately using the royal us, establishing her position, without warning, without messenger, after 5 years of silence. "I sent what I could," he responded, and there was a hint of defensiveness now. "A letter, when I first could manage it. Did it not reach you?" Elisande's eyebrows rose fractionally. "We received nothing." The lie came easily to her lips. The cryptic note still rested in a hidden compartment of her writing desk, its meaning now clear in retrospect, but she would not acknowledge it here, not yet. Ronar's expression darkened. "Then the betrayal runs deeper than I feared." He glanced around the hall, taking in the changed tapestries, the new guards, the altered arrangements of the very furniture. "Much has changed in my absence." "Everything has changed," Elisande stated, allowing the slightest edge to enter her voice. "Blackmere was dying when you left. It thrives now." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered witnesses. Commander Thorne, standing at Elisande's right hand, nodded almost imperceptibly, his hand resting meaningfully on his sword hilt. The message was clear. This castle, these people, had new loyalties now. Ronar seemed to absorb this, his gaze sweeping the room before returning to his wife. "I would speak with you privately," he said. "Not quite a request, not quite a command." Elisande considered him for a long moment, weighing the risks. This man was legally still her husband and the rightful lord of Blackmere, yet he was also a stranger, returned from shadows with unclear motives and unknown allegiances. Her hard-won authority hung in precarious balance. "Commander Thorne." "Lady Margaret, remain," she finally decided, dismissing the rest of the court with a graceful gesture. As the hall emptied, leaving only the four of them in the cavernous space, Elisande finally rose from her seat, descending the 3 steps of the dais to stand on equal footing with Ronar. Up close, the changes in him were even more striking. The scar that bisected his face was jagged and deep, the kind that came from a blade meant to kill, not merely mark. His eyes, once cold and distant, now held shadows she could not decipher. "Speak plainly," she said. "Where have you been these 5 years? And why return now?" Ronar's gaze flicked briefly to Thorne and Margaret before settling back on Elisande. "I was betrayed," he said bluntly. "Captured during the campaign by men I trusted, imprisoned in the fortress of Lord Dravek, in chains, in darkness." "Lord Dravek?" Lady Margaret interjected, her voice sharp with disbelief. "He has been your father's ally for decades, and my betrayer," Ronar countered. "He conspired with Southern lords to remove me, to weaken Blackmere's borders, to claim my lands through manufactured disputes once I was confirmed dead." Elisande's mind raced, fitting this new information into the complex political landscape she had navigated these past years. Lord Dravek had indeed made overtures toward Blackmere's territories, thinly veiled as concerns about a woman ruling alone. "And your escape?" she asked, her tone still carefully measured. "After 5 years?" Something flickered across Ronar's face, pain perhaps, or remembered fear. Prison guards grow complacent with time. One night there was an opportunity. "I took it." His hand unconsciously moved to his side, where Elisande suspected lay another hidden wound. "I have spent months making my way back, avoiding main roads, traveling by night, gathering information." "Information about what?" Commander Thorne demanded, his suspicion evident. "About the alliance forming against Blackmere," Ronar replied, meeting the commander's hostile gaze steadily. "About my wife, who defied all expectations and built a power base of her own." His eyes returned to Elisande, and there was something new in them, a grudging respect perhaps. "About how I might return without bringing immediate danger to your door." "Yet danger follows you nonetheless," Elisande observed. "The Southern clans move against us even now." "They move because of what you have built," Ronar said, surprising her with his candor. "They tolerated Blackmere as a weakened outpost. They fear it as the center of a growing power." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions and accusations. Lady Margaret, ever practical, was the first to break it. "Whatever the circumstances of your return, Sir Ronar, the fact remains that your presence changes the legal standing of Blackmere. By law, you are still lord here." The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Elisande felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Everything she had built, all the respect she had earned through blood and determination and sheer force of will, could it all be undone by the return of a man who had abandoned her to fate? Ronar's response, however, was not what any of them expected. "I make no claim to Blackmere's lordship," he said quietly. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever." Elisande could not hide her surprise. "Explain." Ronar's gaze held hers, direct and uncompromising. "I left a crumbling keep and a political marriage. I returned to find a thriving domain and a wife who has proven herself more capable than many men born to rule." His voice lowered. "I would be a fool to disrupt what works, especially with enemies at our borders." Thorne's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. Lady Margaret's lips parted in shock. Elisande herself felt momentarily unbalanced, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "You suggest?" "What, exactly?" she asked, needing absolute clarity. "I suggest that for now nothing changes publicly," Ronar replied. "You continue as Lady of Blackmere in all matters of governance. I offer my sword and my knowledge of our enemies to strengthen our defenses." His jaw tightened. "When the threat is past, we can determine more permanent arrangements." Elisande studied him, searching for deception or hidden motives in his weathered face. "And I am to believe you content to stand in my shadow, You who once commanded men with an iron fist and brooked no challenge to your authority? Something that might have been pain flashed across Ronar's features before his expression hardened once more. 5 years in chains changes a man's perspective, my lady. I have seen the lowest depths of human cruelty and the highest reaches of human resilience. His gaze bore into hers. I return not as the man who left, but as one who has learned the true cost of pride. A tense silence followed his words. Commander Thorne exchanged a meaningful glance with Lady Margaret, both clearly uncertain how to proceed. Elisande felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon her, a crossroads where one path led to conflict and the other to an uneasy alliance with a man who had once held her heart in his calloused hands, only to abandon it to the cold. You will be given quarters in the East Wing, she finally decided, her voice crisp and authoritative. You will be treated with the respect due your station, but you will hold no authority without my express consent. Commander Thorne will hear what intelligence you have gathered about our enemies. If it proves valuable, we will discuss what role you might play in Blackmere's defense. She took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his beard, to smell the road dust and leather that clung to him. But know this, husband, I built this realm from the ashes you left behind. I will not relinquish it, not even to you. Ronar held her gaze for a long moment, before inclining his head in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both acceptance and a lingering pride. As you wish, my lady. As he turned to follow a servant to his assigned quarters, Elisande caught a glimpse of something in his expression, not anger or resentment as she might have expected, but something more complex. A mixture of regret, admiration, and perhaps most troublingly, determination. Later that evening, Elisande stood alone in her chambers that had once been theirs, staring out at the moon-washed landscape of her domain. The note from Ronar lay unfolded on her desk, its cryptic warning now clear in the context of his return. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alara entered, her young face tight with concern. The castle buzzes with his return, my lady, she said, without preamble. Some of the older servants speak of him with reverence, recalling his strength in battle. Others whisper of his coldness, his harsh judgments before he left. Elisande nodded, unsurprised. And what do you think, Alara? You who have known only my rule? The handmaiden hesitated, then spoke with the honesty Elisande had always valued in her. I think a man does not change his nature entirely, even in chains. I think you should watch him closely. Yes, Elisande agreed quietly. I believe I should. She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The woman who stared back at her was not the abandoned bride of 5 years ago, frightened and uncertain. She was a ruler forged in adversity, tempered by challenge, hardened by solitude. Yet somewhere beneath the carefully constructed armor of her authority, something fragile and long buried stirred at Ronar's return. Not love, certainly, but perhaps the memory of what love might have been, had their marriage been more than a political arrangement cut short by war and betrayal. That night, as Blackmere slept and preparations for war continued in hushed council rooms, husband and wife lay awake in separate chambers, each contemplating the other across a gulf of 5 years and countless unspoken truths. The game had changed. The pieces were rearranged, and neither knew with certainty what the dawn would bring. Dawn broke over Blackmere Castle with a blood-red sky, staining the stone battlements crimson. Elisande watched from the training yard as the sun slowly emerged, casting long shadows across the packed earth where 24 young men and women practiced with wooden swords under Commander Thorne's watchful eye. Footwork! The grizzled veteran barked. Your enemy won't wait for you to find your balance. The recruits, farmers' sons and daughters, blacksmiths' apprentices, even a few, merchants' children, redoubled their efforts, their faces set with determination despite the early hour. These were not born warriors, but ordinary people willing to defend what Elisande had built. Their loyalty warmed her heart, even as she worried for their safety in the coming conflict. They have spirit, came a deep voice from behind her. But spirit alone won't stop a trained knight's blade. Elisande didn't turn, recognizing Ronar's voice instantly despite the years of separation. Spirit combined with proper training might, she replied evenly. These people fight for their homes, not for gold or glory. He moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. In the harsh morning light, she could see how prison had ravaged him. His once powerful frame, while still imposing, had hollows where muscle had wasted away. The scar on his face pulled at his skin when he spoke, giving his expressions an asymmetrical quality that was oddly compelling. I've reviewed the defenses with Commander Thorne, Ronar said, his gaze fixed on the training yard. Your strategies are sound, but there are weaknesses in the Western approach. Elisande raised an eyebrow. The marshlands? We've laid traps throughout. Not enough, he countered. I know Lord Dravek's tactics. He'll send scouts through the deepest sections where your men haven't placed snares. A flicker of irritation passed through her. Even now he presumed to know better. Yet she could not afford to reject sound counsel out of pride, not with her people's lives at stake. Show me, she said simply. They spent the morning walking Blackmere's defenses, Ronar pointing out vulnerabilities with the practiced eye of a battlefield commander, Elisande listening and occasionally challenging his assessments. It was the longest time they had spent in each other's company since his return, and a strange tension hummed between them, not quite hostility, not quite familiarity, but something unresolved and unnamed. The southern gate needs reinforcement, Ronar observed as they inspected the heavy oak and iron structure. A battering ram could breach it within an hour. We've prepared caltrops and burning oil for any who approach, Elisande responded. And archers positioned in the towers can cover the entire approach. He nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. Good, but I would still add a second layer of defense, perhaps a portcullis behind the main gate. With what blacksmiths? Elisande challenged. Every forge in Blackmere is already working day and night to arm our people. Ronar considered this, stroking his bearded jaw thoughtfully. There's a technique, learned during my campaigns in the eastern mountains, using interlocked wooden beams reinforced with iron bands. Slower to raise and lower than a traditional portcullis, but effective and requiring less metal. Despite herself, Elisande was intrigued. Show our craftsmen, she decided. If they believe it can be constructed quickly enough, we'll implement it. As they continued their inspection, Elisande became acutely aware of how the castle staff and guards watched them, some openly, others with furtive glances. The Lord and Lady of Blackmere walking side by side after 5 years of separation was a sight that stirred speculation and whispers. They wonder what this means, Ronar said quietly, evidently noticing the same scrutiny. Us, together. It means we prepare for war, Elisande replied firmly. Nothing more. His gray eyes met hers, searching. Is there nothing more between us then, after all this time? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous in its directness. Elisande felt a complex wave of emotions rise within her, anger at his presumption, a reluctant acknowledgement of their shared past, and something else she refused to name. What was there between us before you left? She countered, her voice low and controlled. A political alliance, a marriage in name only. You never sought my company beyond what duty required. A muscle twitched in Ronar's jaw. I was a different man then, younger, more foolish. And colder, Elisande added, unable to keep the edge from her voice. You treated me as you might a prized falcon, valuable for what I represented, but kept at a distance. Ronar stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The morning light cast half his face in shadow, the scarred half illuminated. I did not know how to be a husband, he admitted, the words seeming to cost him. My father taught me to be a warrior. A lord, but never a partner. I thought strength meant distance. The raw honesty in his voice caught Elisande off guard. This was not the proud, unyielding man who had ridden away 5 years ago. Before she could formulate a response, however, a messenger approached at a run, his face flushed with exertion. My lady, riders approaching from the north, a hunting party from Blackmere village, being pursued by what appears to be an advanced scout force bearing southern colors. The moment of unexpected intimacy shattered, replaced by the urgent reality of their situation. Elisande immediately shifted into the role she had perfected over years of leadership. Sound the alarm. Commander Thorne is to take 20 mounted guards to provide cover for the villagers' retreat, archers to the northern towers. The messenger bowed and sprinted toward the bell tower. Elisande turned to Ronar, all personal matters set aside. If you truly wish to serve Blackmere, ride with them. Your knowledge of southern tactics could save lives. He nodded, already moving toward the stables. I'll need a sword. The armory is open to you, she called after him. Try not to get yourself killed. I have questions that remain unanswered. A ghost of a smile flickered across his scarred face. Your concern is touching, my lady. Within minutes, the courtyard erupted into organized chaos as soldiers mounted, weapons were distributed, and defensive positions secured. Elisande watched from the battlements as Ronar rode out beside Commander Thorne, his back straight despite years of imprisonment, his hand steady on the reins of a powerful black stallion from Blackmere's stables. She told herself her concern was purely strategic. Ronar possessed valuable intelligence about their enemies. His loss would be a tactical disadvantage, nothing more. Yet as the riders disappeared into the forest that bordered Blackmere's northern approach, Elisande found herself gripping the stone merlin with white-knuckled intensity. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Elisande moved through the castle, overseeing preparations, reassuring staff, projecting a calm she did not entirely feel. When the lookout finally called that riders were returning, she maintained her dignified pace to the battlements, though her heart quickened traitorously. The sight that greeted her was both relief and new cause for alarm. The hunting party had been safely recovered, 3 men and 2 women, shaken but largely unharmed. Commander Thorne led the returning guards, his expression grim. And at the rear, Ronar rode with a small, limp figure cradled before him on his saddle. Elisande descended to the courtyard as they entered, medical supplies already being prepared under Lady Margaret's direction. Ambushed, Thorne reported tersely as he dismounted. At least 30 Southern scouts, well armed. They weren't just patrolling, they were hunting. Casualties? Elisande asked, her gaze drawn to the still form Ronar was carefully lowering. From his horse, 2 guards wounded, not seriously, and this boy, he was with the hunting party, took an arrow meant for his father. Elisande moved swiftly to where Ronar knelt beside the injured child, a lad of perhaps 12 summers whose face was white with shock and pain. An arrow protruded from his shoulder, the shaft mercifully intact. He fought bravely, Ronar said quietly as Elisande knelt opposite him. Tried to defend his family with nothing but a hunting knife. Lady Margaret arrived with her healers gently, shooing both Elisande and Ronar aside to tend to the boy. As they stepped back, Elisande noticed for the first time that Ronar's left sleeve was slashed and darkened with blood. "You're wounded," she observed, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. He glanced at his arm dismissively. A scratch. The scouts were well trained, but predictable. They favored their right sides, leaving their left flanks exposed. "And yet one managed to mark you," Elisande noted, gesturing for a healer to attend him. Ronar's expression darkened. "I was distracted. The boy reminded me of myself at that age. Fierce, determined to protect what he loved." As a healer approached, with bandages, Elisande studied Ronar's face, seeing genuine emotion where once there had been only cold calculation. The man who had left Blackmere would never have risked himself for a village child, would never have admitted to such sentimental distraction. "The scout's presence changes our timeline," she said, deliberately steering the conversation back to strategy. "If they're already this far north, the main force cannot be far behind." Ronar nodded grimly as the healer cut away his sleeve to reveal a clean slice across his bicep. 3 days, perhaps 4 at most, before they reach our borders. In force. Then we have much to prepare, Elisande replied, turning to issue orders to the gathered staff and guards. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of accelerated preparations. Elisande moved through the castle and surrounding village like a force of nature, her calm authority inspiring confidence even as she delivered news of imminent danger. Grain was stockpiled, weapons distributed, defensive positions strengthened. As dusk fell, she found herself in the map room with her war council, Commander Thorne, Lady Margaret, Master Edwin, Lord Asher, and now Ronar, his wounded arm bandaged, but otherwise appearing unaffected by the day's skirmish. The boy, Elisande asked Lady Margaret as they gathered around the large table where a detailed map of Blackmir's territories was spread. "He will recover," the older woman replied with a small smile. "The arrow missed any vital structures. He's all ready, asking when he can rejoin the fight." "Brave lad," Thorne commented, a hint of approval in his gruff voice. Ronar leaned over the map, his finger tracing the likely approach of the southern forces. "They'll come through here," he said, indicating a valley between two forested ridges. "The obvious route, wide enough for their numbers, with clear sight lines." "Then we make the obvious route a death trap," Elisande replied, already formulating a strategy. "Thorne, what if we position archers here and here?" She pointed to the elevated positions on either side of the valley. The discussion continued late into the night, plans made and refined, contingencies considered. Throughout it all, Elisande was keenly aware of Ronar's presence, his insights, valuable, his manner changed. Where once he might have dominated such a council, now he offered suggestions respectfully, deferring to her final decisions. When at last the meeting concluded, the candles burned low and the castle settled into uneasy sleep. Elisande found herself alone with Ronar in the map room. He stood by the narrow window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape, his profile sharp against the darkness. "You've built something remarkable here," he said without turning. "Not just walls and weapons, but loyalty. Trust." Elisande approached, slowly stopping a few paces from him. "Necessity is a harsh teacher. When I was left alone, I had to become more than I was." Now he did turn, his gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And I less," he said quietly. "In that cell, stripped of title, of power, of dignity, I learned what truly matters." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken histories and possibilities. Elisande felt a strange tension in her chest, not quite pain, not quite hope. "We should rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will test us all." Ronar nodded, but made no move to leave. "Elisande," he said, her name sounding foreign on his lips after so many years of formal address. "If I fall in the coming battle, I would have you know one truth. My greatest regret is not the years in prison, but the years before. When I had a wife, I did not know how to treasure." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Elisande felt something shift within her, a crack in the walls she had built around her heart. "Rest well, Ronar," she replied softly, unable to offer more, unwilling to offer less. "Blackmir needs us both strong for what comes." As she walked away, she felt his gaze follow her, weighted with words still unspoken. And for the first time, since his return, Elisande allowed herself to wonder if perhaps what had been broken between them might, in time, be not restored, for that was impossible, but forged anew, tempered by fire and absence into something neither of them could have imagined in those distant days of their cold marriage. The war council gathered in the candlelit chamber, faces grim as Commander Thorne laid a captured southern banner on the table, black and crimson, bearing the snarling wolf emblem of Lord Dravik. The morning's scout reports had confirmed their worst fears. The Southern Army had crossed Blackmir's outer borders, burning 2 small settlements in their path. 500 men at least, Thorne reported, his weathered face lined with concern. Heavy cavalry, foot soldiers, siege engines being assembled as they march. Elisande studied the map where markers indicated the enemy's progress. Their path suggests they'll reach the valley crossing within 2 days. Where our traps await, Lord Asher added, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. The narrow passage will neutralize their advantage in numbers. Ronar leaned forward, his expression troubled. It's too obvious, he said quietly. Dravik knows these lands almost as well as we do. He won't march his entire force through such an easily defended position. A tense silence followed his words. Elisande met his gaze across the table, finding no deception there, only genuine concern. "You believe it's a feint," she said. "It wasn't a question." He nodded. "A portion of their force will approach via the valley, yes. But Dravek will lead his elite guard through the eastern marsh paths. Difficult terrain, but passable with local guides. They'll attempt to circle behind our main defenses while we're occupied with the valley battle." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "How can you be so certain of his strategy?" "Because it's what I would have done," Ronar answered simply, "and because I overheard him planning similar tactics during my confinement. Dravek keeps his prisoners close. Information is valuable, even when he believes those hearing it will never live to share it." Elisande considered this, her mind racing through implications and contingencies. If Ronar was right, and something in her gut told her he was, then their carefully laid defenses would be insufficient. "We cannot abandon the valley defenses," she decided. "But we must prepare for this flanking maneuver as well." She turned to Thorn. "How quickly can we position a force to intercept them in the marshlands?" The commander stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "The terrain is treacherous, my lady. Our local forces know it well, but moving a significant number of fighters into position without detection would be challenging." "A smaller force, then," Ronar suggested. "Elite, mobile, fighters who know every inch of the marshland." "Led by whom?" Lord Asher asked, his tone skeptical. "Commander Thorn must oversee our main defenses." A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. Elisande knew what Ronar would suggest before he spoke, could read it in the set of his shoulders, the determination in his eyes. "I will lead them," he said, his voice steady. "I know Dravek's tactics better than anyone. I know how he thinks, how he fights, and how he betrays," Lady Margaret added pointedly. Ronar did not flinch from the implied accusation. "Yes, which makes me uniquely qualified to anticipate his treachery." Elisande studied her husband's face, searching for any hint of deception or hidden motive. She found only resolve, and something else, a burning need for justice, perhaps, or redemption. "The marshland defense would require intimate knowledge of the terrain," she observed. "You've been absent 5 years. The seasonal paths change." Then, "Give me guides who know the current routes," Ronar countered. "I'll adapt." Commander Thorn cleared his throat. "The marsh hunters, a dozen men and women who trap and forage there year-round. They're not soldiers, but they're stealthy and know every solid foothold in that cursed bog." Elisande weighed the risks silently. Sending Ronar to command a critical defensive position meant trusting him with not just the mission, but with Blackmere's very survival. If his loyalties had shifted, if this was an elaborate deception. But what choice did she have? No one else possessed his knowledge of their enemy. "Very well," she decided, her voice betraying none of her internal conflict. "Commander, Thorn will oversee our primary defense at the valley. Sir Ronar will lead the marsh hunters to intercept Lord Dravek's flanking force." She fixed Ronar with a penetrating stare. "Choose your fighters carefully. You'll depart at dawn." As the council dispersed to prepare, Elisande remained at the table, studying the map with intense focus. She was aware of Ronar lingering, waiting until they were alone before approaching her side. "Thank you for your trust," he said quietly. Elisande didn't look up from the map. "It's not trust, Sir Ronar. It's necessity." A brief silence followed, heavy with unspoken tensions. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of frustration. "Will nothing convince you that I am not your enemy?" Now she did look up, meeting his gray eyes directly. "5 years ago, you rode away with barely a farewell. For 5 years I heard nothing, no message, no word of whether you lived or died." The calm facade she maintained before the council cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of old wounds. "I built this realm from nothing, protected our people when no one else would. And now you return, expecting what? Open arms? Unquestioning faith?" Ronar's scarred face tightened. "I expect nothing," he said, his voice low and intense. I earned nothing from you, but I am here now, offering what skills I have to protect what you've built. What we've built. She corrected him automatically, then seemed surprised by her own words. Something shifted in Ronar's expression, a softening around his eyes. Yes, he agreed quietly. What we've built. You with your courage and leadership. Me with my absence that forced you to become the ruler you are. The unexpected humility in his tone caught Elisande off guard. This was not the proud warrior who had left Blackmere years ago. Prison had changed him, or revealed something that had always been buried beneath his rigid exterior. There is something you should know, she said, making a sudden decision. About Lord Dravek. Ronar tensed visibly. What of him? 2 years ago he sent an envoy to Blackmere, officially to discuss border disputes, but privately to offer me a proposition. Elisande's voice was level, but her eyes never left Ronar's face. He suggested an alliance through marriage, once you were declared legally dead. The color drained from Ronar's face, his scar standing out livid against his suddenly pale skin. And your response? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I sent his envoy back with a message that Blackmere needs no alliances purchased through marriage beds, she replied, a hint of steel entering her tone. And that I found it curious he was so certain of your death when no body had ever been recovered. A complex mixture of emotions crossed Ronar's features. Rage, vindication, and something that might have been pride. He never mentioned this reaction of yours during my imprisonment, he said slowly, though he took particular pleasure in suggesting you would soon accept a new husband. He wanted to break you, Elisande observed, to make you believe you were forgotten. He nearly succeeded, Ronar admitted, his voice barely audible. He looked down at his scarred hands, flexing fingers that still didn't quite straighten properly. There were days when only hatred kept me alive. Hatred and the memory of Blackmere. Not of me. The question slipped out before Elisande could stop it, more vulnerable than she had intended. Ronar's gaze lifted to meet hers, something raw and honest in his expression. Of you most of all, he said simply, though I had no right to such memories. I was not a husband worthy of remembrance. The candlelight flickered between them, casting dancing shadows across the map of the lands they both fought to protect. For a moment Elisande saw not the scarred warrior before her, but glimpses of the young man she had first met. Stern and unyielding, yes, but also possessed of a certain integrity that had been rare at court. Dawn comes early, she said finally, stepping back from the table. You should prepare for your mission. Ronar nodded, accepting the shift back to practical matters. My lady, he said, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. Before I go, I would ask one question. Ask, she permitted, her guard rising instinctively. In all these years alone, did you ever, he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, did you ever wish for my return? The question hung in the air between them, disarming in its directness. Elisande felt a sudden tightness in her chest, memories flooding back of lonely nights in the early years, of wondering whether he lived or died, of gradually learning to build a life that did not depend on the answer. At first, she admitted quietly, before I learned to stand alone. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, acceptance, understanding. He bowed formally, the gesture somehow more personal than any words could have been. I ride at dawn, he said, for Blackmere. As he left the chamber, Elisande remained by the map table, her fingers tracing the marshland routes where Ronar would soon lead his small force against overwhelming odds. She told herself her concern was strategic, that Blackmere could not afford to lose his knowledge of their enemy. But in the privacy of the empty room, she acknowledged the truth she had been denying since his return. Despite everything, despite the years of abandonment and the cold marriage that had preceded them, some part of her still responded to him, not with the blind devotion of a young bride, but with the complex recognition of one survivor for another. Dawn broke gray and misty over Blackmere, the sun struggling to penetrate low clouds that shrouded the marshlands in ghostly vapor. In the courtyard, Ronar stood with his assembled team, 12 marsh hunters equipped with lightweight leather armor, short bows, and slender blades designed for close combat in restricted spaces. They were not soldiers, but hunters and trappers, their knowledge of the treacherous wetlands their greatest weapon. Elisande descended the castle steps, her crimson cloak stark against the morning gloom. The assembled fighters bowed as she approached. "You carry Blackmere's hopes with you," she addressed them, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Not just its defense, but its future. The enemy believes we are weak because we value all our people, not just those of noble birth. Today, you will show them the strength that comes from such unity." Murmurs of assent rippled through the small band. These were her people, men and women who had thrived under her leadership, who had known her justice and protection. She turned to Ronar last, standing slightly apart from the others. He wore simple, dark leather armor that would blend with the marsh terrain, his sword, not the ornate weapon of a lord, but a practical, well-balanced blade, strapped across his back. "Sir Ronar," she said formally, then lowered her voice as she stepped closer. "Dravek will not expect you. Your appearance will shock him. Use that advantage." "I intend to," he replied, his voice grim with purpose. Elisande hesitated, then removed a slender dagger from her belt, the same blade she had carried during the defense of Oakvale 5 years ago, when she had first established her authority. The hilt was wrapped in fine leather, the blade etched with Blackmere's phoenix emblem. "Take this," she said, offering it to him. "It has served me well in desperate moments." Ronar's eyes widened slightly at the gesture. He accepted the dagger with careful hands, as if receiving something precious rather than merely a weapon. "I will return it to you," he promised, securing it within his armor. The unspoken meaning was clear. "I will return." As the marsh party mounted and prepared to depart, Ronar's gaze lingered on Elisande, something unresolved in his expression. Then he turned his horse and led his fighters through the gates, disappearing into the misty morning like ghosts slipping between worlds. Elisande watched until the last rider vanished from sight, her face composed into the mask of certainty. Her people needed to see. Only Alara, standing faithfully at her side, noticed the slight tremor in her lady's hand as she turned back toward the castle. "He will succeed," the handmaiden offered quietly. Elisande nodded once, sharply. "He must," she replied, "for all our sakes." She did not speak aloud the thought that followed, the fear that had kept her awake through the night, that she had sent him to his death, and that his loss, this time permanent, irrevocable, would leave a wound not even Blackmere's remarkable resilience could heal. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Blackmere Castle hummed with purposeful activity, as final preparations for the coming battle transformed the fortress into a bastion of defense. Elisande moved through it all with outward calm, inspecting fortifications, reviewing battle plans with Commander Thorne, and reassuring her people with a confidence she maintained through sheer force of will. No word had come from the marshlands. No signal fires, no returning scouts. The silence from Ronar's mission hung over Elisande like a physical weight, though she allowed none of her concern to show in her public demeanor. On the evening of the 3rd day, she stood alone on the western battlements, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of amber and crimson. The valley where they expected the main southern force gleamed in the fading light, deceptively peaceful. According to their scouts, Lord Dravek's army would reach that position by midday tomorrow. "My lady," Alara's soft voice interrupted her. "Solitude." The handmaiden approached with a sealed parchment in her hand. "A messenger just arrived, from the eastern watchtower." Elisande took the message, breaking the wax seal with steady fingers, despite the sudden leap of her pulse. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, the message brief. "Phoenix rises in marsh shadows, wolf bleeds. Expect dawn return," a coded message from the marsh party. Phoenix, Blackmere's emblem. Wolf, Lord Dravek's. The meaning was clear. Ronar's mission had found success, and they were returning. Relief washed through her, so intense it was almost painful. She had not realized how deeply she had feared for his fate until this moment, when that fear lifted. Elisande took a measured breath, composing herself before turning to Alara. "Prepare the healing chamber," she instructed, "and inform Commander Thorne that Sir Ronar's party returns at dawn. They may have wounded." As Alara hurried away, Elisande remained on the battlements, her gaze now turned eastward toward the misty expanse of marshland barely visible in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in that treacherous landscape, Ronar led his fighters homeward. The mission had succeeded, but at what cost? The terse message gave no details, no count of casualties. She did not allow herself to examine too closely the wave of emotion that had surged through her at confirmation of his survival. There was no place for such feelings now, on the eve of battle. Blackmere needed its lady clear-headed and focused, yet as darkness fell and she finally retired to her chambers, sleep eluded her. She found herself pacing before the hearth, replaying her last conversation with Ronar, remembering the look in his eyes when she had given him her dagger. There had been something there, not the cold determination of the warrior she had married, but something deeper, more human. Vulnerability, perhaps, or regret. Dawn broke with a pale, watery light filtering through lingering mist. Elisande, already dressed and armored in the distinctive breastplate commissioned years ago when she first took command of Blackmere's defenses, stood in the courtyard as the eastern gate creaked open. The marsh party staggered through in ragged formation. Of the 12 hunters who had departed with Ronar, 10 returned, a remarkable rate of survival for such a perilous mission. Most bore minor wounds, cuts, bruises, one with an arm roughly bandaged and held close to his chest. Their expressions were exhausted but triumphant, the look of warriors who had faced death and emerged victorious, and at their center walked Ronar, supporting a limping hunter with one arm while his other hand gripped a blood-stained sword. His armor was slashed in several places, dark stains indicating where blades had found flesh beneath. A new cut bisected his eyebrow, still crusted with dried blood. But he walked tall, his gray eyes scanning the courtyard until they found Elisande. "My lady," he called, his voice hoarse but strong, "we bring news of victory." The courtyard erupted in cheers as Elisande approached the returning fighters. Healers rushed forward to attend the wounded, and Thorne's lieutenants moved to hear the tactical report. But for a moment, Elisande's focus narrowed to Ronar alone, standing before her with the evidence of battle written across his body. "Lord Dravek?" she asked, her voice pitched for his ears only. A grim satisfaction flickered across Ronar's features. Wounded, but alive. His flanking forces scattered, half dead in the marshes, the rest fleeing back to rejoin their main army. He reached within his armor and withdrew her dagger, now clean but with dark stains still visible in the leather wrapping of the hilt. "As promised, my lady." Elisande accepted the blade, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "Come," she said. "The council must hear your report in full and your wounds need tending." In the great hall, with the war council hastily assembled despite the early hour, Ronar detailed their mission with concise precision, how they had located Dravek's elite guard navigating the treacherous marsh paths with local guides, how they had set ambushes at critical junctures where solid ground narrowed to slivers between sucking bogs. "We struck from the mist like ghosts," he explained, standing rigid despite injuries that would have felled a lesser man. Their heavy armor became a death sentence in the soft ground. Dravek lost 30 men before they even understood they were under attack. "And Dravek himself?" Commander Thorne asked, leaning forward intently. A cold smile touched Ronar's lips. "I found him in the chaos. He recognized me. I made certain of it before I struck." His hand unconsciously touched his scarred face. "I could have killed him, but a quick death would be too merciful. Instead, I marked him as he once marked me and left him to retreat in shame." A murmur of approval rippled through the council. Justice had been served, not complete perhaps, but significant. Elisande studied Ronar's face as he spoke, seeing not bloodlust in his expression but the grim satisfaction of a debt partially repaid. "Dravek will rejoin the main force," Ronar continued, addressing Elisande directly now. "But his defeat in The marshes will have consequences. His reputation is damaged. The other southern lords will question his leadership. Creating division we can exploit, Elisande concluded, her tactical mind already calculating the advantages this development provided. Commander Thorne, adjust our valley defenses accordingly. If the southern lords are no longer in full agreement, their attack formation may be compromised. As the council discussed modifications to their battle strategy, a messenger arrived, with a sealed parchment bearing the royal crest. The conversation halted as all eyes turned to this unexpected development. Relations with the crown had been distant, but formally correct during Elisande's rule. Royal intervention now, on the eve of battle, could change everything. Elisande broke the seal and read the message, her expression revealing nothing of its contents. When she looked up, her gaze swept the room before settling on Ronar. "The king's emissary approaches Blackmere," she announced. "Lord Chancellor Aldrich himself, with a royal escort. They request safe passage through our defenses." Murmurs of surprise and speculation filled the chamber. The Lord Chancellor was the king's right hand, second in power only to the monarch himself. His presence at such a critical moment could not be coincidence. "When do they arrive?" Thorne asked, already calculating the security implications. "By midday, according to this message." Elisande carefully refolded the parchment. "Just as the southern army reaches the valley." "Convenient timing," Ronar observed, his voice edged with suspicion. "The crown has never shown interest in Blackmere's affairs before. Why now at the moment of battle?" Lady Margaret, who had been quietly observing until now, leaned forward. "The king cannot openly oppose the southern lords without cause. They control too much wealth and influence, but neither can he allow an independent territory like Blackmere to fall without royal sanction. He sends his chancellor to observe," Lord Asher suggested, "to determine which side to support based on the battle's progress, or to negotiate terms that benefit the crown regardless of the outcome," Elisande countered, her political acumen sharpened by years of careful maneuvering. "We will receive Lord Chancellor Aldrich with all due respect, but our preparations continue. Blackmere's defense remains our priority." The council dispersed to their duties, the unexpected royal involvement adding new complexity to an already tense situation. Elisande remained in the great hall with Ronar, both acutely aware that they had not yet spoken privately since his return from the marshlands. "You need a healer's attention," she observed, gesturing to the blood still seeping through his armor in places. Ronar shook his head dismissively. "Minor wounds. They can wait." "They cannot." Elisande contradicted him firmly. "I need all my commanders at full strength, especially now that royal politics enters the equation." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at being counted among her commanders despite their complicated history. He inclined his head in acquiescence. "As you wish, my lady." They walked together to the healing chambers, their pace measured, neither acknowledging the curious glances that followed them through the castle corridors. Lady Margaret's apprentices swarmed Ronar immediately upon their arrival, directing him to a treatment bench while they gathered salves and bandages. "I will leave you to their care," Elisande said, turning to depart. Elisande. Her name, spoken without title or formality, halted her at the doorway. She turned back to find Ronar looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, unexpectedly. "There's something you should know about Dravek," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Something I discovered during the ambush." She approached closer, conscious of the healers moving discreetly out of earshot. "What is it?" "He spoke of the Lord Chancellor's involvement," Ronar revealed, wincing slightly as he shifted on the bench. "Said the crown had promised him Blackmere once you were removed, that arrangements had already been made." Elisande's expression hardened. "So the royal visit is no coincidence." "I believe the Chancellor comes to witness your defeat," Ronar confirmed grimly. "Or to ensure it, if Dravek's forces prove insufficient." The implication settled between them like a physical weight. Blackmere now faced not just the Southern Alliance, but potentially the crown itself, a far more dangerous opponent. "Then we must be prepared for treachery from all quarters," Elisande said, her mind already racing ahead to contingencies and counter-strategies. Ronar caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his grip gentle but insistent. "There's more." he said, his voice dropping further. Dravek spoke of you. With fear. Not contempt, not dismissal, but genuine fear. The woman who built a kingdom from nothing. Those were his words. Something warm and fierce bloomed in Elisand's chest at this revelation, not pride exactly, but vindication. The men who had once dismissed her as merely an abandoned wife now feared her strength. Good, she said simply. Fear makes men careless. Ronar's scarred lips curved in a small smile. Indeed it does. He released her wrist, but his gaze held. We have overcome greater odds before, separately. Now we stand together. The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their immediate tactical situation. Elisande felt the weight of their shared past and this uncertain present, of old wounds and new possibilities. Rest, she instructed, stepping back. The battle comes, and Blackmere needs all its defenders strong. As she strode from the healing chambers, Elisande's mind filled with preparations for the Chancellor's arrival and the imminent southern attack. But beneath these practical concerns ran an undercurrent of something else, a realization that her feelings toward Ronar had shifted, becoming something more complex than the cold resentment she had nursed for 5 years, or the wary suspicion that had greeted his return. He had fought for Blackmere, bled for it, returned victorious not to claim glory or demand recognition of his rightful place, but to warn her of dangers still to come. The man who had abandoned her had returned, not unchanged, but perhaps remade by suffering into someone worthy of, if not forgiveness, then at least consideration. As the sun climbed toward midday, bringing with it both enemy armies and royal emissaries, Elisande stood on Blackmere's highest tower, surveying the domain she had built from ruins. Whatever the coming hours might bring, one truth remained constant. She would defend her people and her home with every resource at her command, including the unexpected ally who had once been her husband in name only, and who now fought at her side with a loyalty she had never expected to receive from him. The battle for Blackmere had begun. Snow began to fall as Lord Chancellor Aldrich's procession wound its way up the final approach to Blackmere Castle. Elisande watched from the battlements, the white flakes settling on her dark cloak and in her chestnut hair. An unseasonable storm. This early in autumn, perhaps an ill omen, or perhaps a blessing. Snow would slow the southern army's advance, buying precious time for Blackmere's defenders. Impressive display, Ronar commented, joining her at the parapet. His wounds had been dressed, though he moved with the careful precision of a man managing pain. 20 royal guards, the king's personal banner. The Chancellor means to remind us of the crown's authority. Elisande nodded, studying the approaching party with a shrewd eye. And to intimidate us before negotiations begin. She turned to face Ronar, noting the fresh scar forming above his eyebrow. You should be resting. There will be time for rest when Blackmere is secure, he replied, his gaze steady. I've had worse injuries. The unspoken reference to his imprisonment hung between them, neither willing to revisit that topic with royal representatives approaching. We should greet our distinguished guest, Elisande said, moving toward the stairway. Together. Ronar's eyebrows rose slightly at this inclusion, but he fell into step beside her as they descended to the courtyard. Commander Thorne awaited them, having organized an honor guard that projected both respect and strength. Blackmere's finest soldiers in polished armor, arranged to showcase their discipline while subtly revealing the fortress's robust defenses. A fine balance, Ronar murmured, noting the arrangement. Honorable, but not subservient. Commander Thorne understands court politics better than he admits, Elisande replied with the ghost of a smile. He served in the Royal Guard in his youth. The gates swung open, and Lord Chancellor Aldrich entered Blackmere Castle with calculated pomp. A man in his 60s, thin and elegant with a silver-streaked beard and penetrating blue eyes, he sat his white stallion with the practiced ease of one born to privilege. His crimson and gold robes, embroidered with the royal crest, stood out starkly against the snow and stone. Lady Elisande, he called, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard as he dismounted. It has been too long since the crown has had the pleasure of Blackmere's hospitality. Lord Chancellor, Elisande replied with a formal bow. Precisely. Measured to show respect without submission. Blackmere welcomes you, though we are surprised by your timing. We stand on the brink of battle. Aldrich's smile did not reach his eyes. Indeed, the Crown is deeply concerned about this regional conflict. King Edmund desires peace within his realm. His gaze shifted to Ronar, and genuine surprise flashed across his features before he masked it with practiced diplomacy. Sir Ronar, reports of your demise were clearly exaggerated. The king will be most interested to learn of your return. No doubt, Ronar replied evenly, as he will be interested to learn how Lord Dravek came to imprison a loyal noble without trial or royal sanction for 5 years. A tense silence followed this direct challenge. Elisande subtly shifted her position, a silent reminder to Ronar. That confrontation was premature. They needed information before they showed their hand. Such serious allegations deserve proper attention. Aldrich responded smoothly. After the current situation is resolved, of course. He gestured to the sky, where the snow fell more heavily now. Perhaps we might continue this discussion indoors. The weather grows inhospitable. Of course, Elisande agreed. We have prepared chambers for you and your men. A meal awaits in the great hall once you have refreshed from your journey. As servants led the royal party to their quarters, Elisande and Ronar exchanged a meaningful glance. The Chancellor's careful non-reaction to Ronar's accusation spoke volumes. He knew, Ronar said quietly as they walked toward the private council chamber. He knew I was imprisoned. It seems likely, Elisande agreed, her voice equally low. But knowledge is not the same as complicity. We must learn more before we make accusations against the crown. The council chamber was warm, a crackling fire, warding off the unusual chill that had descended with the snow. Commander Thorne and Lady Margaret waited within, their expressions grave. Our scouts report the Southern Army has halted their advance due to the snowfall, Thorne announced without preamble. They've made camp 3 leagues from the valley approach. If this weather holds, they won't attack until tomorrow at earliest. A fortunate delay, Lady Margaret observed. It gives us time to determine the Chancellor's true purpose, and to prepare for the possibility that he means to undermine us from within, Ronar added darkly. Elisande moved to the window, watching snowflakes swirl against the darkening sky. We proceed carefully. The Chancellor represents the king. Whatever our suspicions, we cannot appear disloyal to the crown, even if the crown conspires with Dravek, Ronar challenged, a hint of the old fire in his voice. Elisande turned to face him, her expression resolute. Especially then. Open defiance would give them the justification they seek to move against us legally. We must be smarter. She addressed the entire council now. During the meal, observe the Chancellor carefully. Note what questions he asks, what information he seeks. Share nothing of our defensive preparations unless I directly approve it. As the council dispersed to prepare for the evening's diplomatic dance, Elisande found herself momentarily alone with Ronar. The fire's glow softened the harsh lines of his scarred face, reminding her fleetingly of the handsome, stern young lord she had married a lifetime ago. You've become a skilled diplomat, he observed, something like admiration in his voice. The woman I left would have struggled with such political maneuvering. The woman you left had no choice but to learn quickly, Elisande replied, without the bitterness that would have colored such words days earlier. Survival required it. Ronar moved closer, his expression earnest. I have no right to ask this, but I must know, in all these years of building Blackmere, of becoming this formidable leader, have you ever been happy? The unexpected question caught Elisande off guard. She considered deflecting it, maintaining the careful distance she had established since his return. But something in his gaze, vulnerability mixed with genuine concern, prompted honesty. Not happiness as young girls dream of it, she answered carefully, but satisfaction, purpose, pride in what I've accomplished. Yes, I've known those. They have been enough. Ronar nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I'm glad, he said simply. You deserved better than the life I gave you before. Before she could respond to this unexpected contrition, a servant appeared to announce that the Chancellor had arrived in the Great Hall. The moment of personal connection dissolved as they both straightened, armor of a different sort sliding into place as they prepared to face their royal guest. The Great Hall of Blackmere had been transformed for the occasion. Extra torches and candles bathed the space in warm light, highlighting the restored tapestries and polished oak of the high table. The meal prepared was generous without being extravagant, a diplomatic balance that showcased Blackmere's prosperity while acknowledging the austerity appropriate to a fortress preparing for battle. Lord Chancellor Aldrich sat at Elisand's right hand with Ronar positioned across from him, a deliberate arrangement that allowed husband and wife to observe the Chancellor from different angles while presenting a united front. The conversation began with harmless pleasantries, discussions of the unexpected weather, compliments on the castle's restoration. "You've accomplished remarkable things here, Lady Elisande," Aldrich observed, sipping the excellent wine Blackmere's cellars had provided. When reports first reached court of a woman ruling these northern territories alone, many counseled the king to intervene. But your success was difficult to argue with. Blackmere has always paid its taxes promptly and maintained order within its borders, Elisande replied evenly. The crown had no cause for concern. Indeed, Aldrich agreed smoothly, though some at court questioned the precedent of a woman ruling independently, without male guidance. His gaze flickered meaningfully to Ronar. "My wife needed no guidance," Ronar interjected, his tone pleasant but with steel beneath. As her accomplishments clearly demonstrate, Aldrich's eyebrows rose fractionally at this united response. "Quite so. And now that you have returned, Sir Ronar, what changes might we expect in Blackmere's governance?" The question hung in the air, its significance unmistakable. The Chancellor was probing for divisions between them, seeking leverage. Blackmere's success under Lady Elisande's leadership requires no alteration. Ronar replied firmly. "My return changes nothing in that regard." Elisande felt a surprising warmth at his words. Not just diplomatic support, but genuine recognition of her achievement. She maintained her composed expression, however, as she steered the conversation toward more pressing matters. "While we appreciate the Crown's sudden interest in Blackmere's internal affairs, Lord Chancellor, I confess greater concern about the Southern Army camped on our borders," she said. "Has the king sent you to mediate this conflict?" Aldrich dabbed his lips with a fine linen napkin before responding. "The king wishes peace, of course. Lord Dravek has expressed concerns about Blackmere's expanding influence. He claims merely to be protecting his own borders." "With 500 armed men?" Ronar asked skeptically. "And after imprisoning me without trial for 5 years? Curious defensive measures." The Chancellor's eyes narrowed slightly. "As I said earlier, such serious allegations require investigation after the current situation is resolved." "And how does the Crown propose to resolve it?" Elisande pressed. Aldrich set down his wine goblet precisely. "The king authorizes me to negotiate terms acceptable to both parties. Lord Dravek has already indicated his willingness to withdraw his forces under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Ronar demanded, tension evident in his posture despite his controlled tone. The Chancellor smiled thinly. "A return to traditional governance, for one. Recognition of southern territorial claims along the disputed marshlands. Perhaps a formal alliance through marriage between your houses to prevent future conflicts." Elisande's expression remained impassive, though anger flared within her at the audacity of these conditions. They amounted to surrendering everything she had built, returning Blackmere to its former subservient position, and binding herself or some other unfortunate woman to Dravek's house. "Interesting proposals," she replied, her voice cool. "And if we find these terms unacceptable," Aldrich spread his hands in a gesture of regret, "then the Crown cannot intervene in what would be considered a legitimate territorial dispute. Blackmere would face the Southern Alliance alone, as we have faced all challenges these past 5 years," Elisande observed. "Your candor is appreciated, Lord Chancellor. We will consider the Crown's position carefully." The conversation turned to lighter topics as the meal concluded, but the message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. submit to Dravek's terms, or fight without royal support. Later that night, as snow continued to fall and heavy silence outside, Elisand's war council reconvened in hushed conference. The crown sides with Dravek, Commander Thorne growled, his weathered face flushed with anger. After all our years of loyalty, they side with power and wealth, Lady Margaret corrected grimly. Dravek's alliance controls valuable trade routes the king cannot afford to alienate, and now the Chancellor expects us to surrender everything, to pretend these 5 years never happened. Lord Asher added, his young face troubled. To return Blackmere to its former state. Elisande listened to their outrage in silence, her mind working through strategies and consequences. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but resolute. We will not surrender what we have built, she declared. Nor will we openly defy the crown. There is a path between these extremes. Ronar, who had been unusually quiet during the discussion, leaned forward. You have a plan. It wasn't a question, but an observation born of growing understanding of the strategic mind that had transformed Blackmere from forgotten outpost to respected territory. Elisande nodded. The snow delays Dravek's attack, giving us time. Tonight, I will appear to consider the Chancellor's terms, keeping him occupied with negotiations while our final preparations continue. Her gaze swept the council. Meanwhile, we accelerate our defensive strategy. Commander Thorne, is the valley trap ready? Yes, my lady. The concealed pits are complete, the oil reserves positioned. Good. Double the archers on the ridge positions. She turned to Ronar. You know Dravek better than any of us. Will he risk attacking in this weather? Ronar considered the question carefully. Not his main force, no. But he might send a smaller party through the western approach, hoping to exploit any weakness while we're distracted by the Chancellor. Then we strengthen the western watch immediately, Elisande decided, and prepare a surprise of our own for any who attempt that route. As the council dispersed to implement these orders, Ronar remained behind, studying Elisande with newfound respect. You've outmaneuvered them all, he said quietly. The Chancellor, Dravek, even the southern lords who thought to intimidate you with their numbers. Elisande's lips curved in a small, tight smile. The game is not won yet. But you play it masterfully, Ronar observed. He hesitated, then added, I was a fool to ever leave Blackmere's defense in another's hands, even yours. Not because you weren't capable, but because I missed witnessing your transformation into this formidable woman. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Elisande's cheeks. For a moment, the years between them seemed to compress, the cold distance narrowing. The woman I was then could never have held Blackmere against these threats, she admitted. Perhaps in some strange way your absence was necessary. A kind interpretation of abandonment, Ronar said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. But I will accept it if it brings us closer to understanding. Their eyes met across the council table, the firelight casting dancing shadows between them. Something shifted in that quiet moment. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a new foundation, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or resentment. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion in the corridor outside. Commander Thorne burst into the chamber, his expression urgent. My lady, Sir Ronar. The Western sentries report movement. A small force approaching through the snow. They exchanged a quick glance, both rising immediately to action. Dravek tests our defenses, Ronar confirmed grimly. Then he shall find them unyielding, Elisande replied, already moving toward the door. Come, let us show our enemies what it means to threaten Blackmere in winter. Together they strode through the torch-lit corridors of the castle, united in purpose, if not yet fully in heart. As the snow continued to fall outside like a silent curtain drawn across the stage of their unfolding drama, the western approach to Blackmere Castle wound through a narrow defile bordered by towering pines, now heavy with snow. In the frigid darkness, Elisande knelt beside Ronar behind a natural outcropping of rock, watching the shadowy figures moving through the snowfall below. 24 soldiers in Dravek's colors crept toward the castle's least defended wall, their progress slowed by the treacherous footing. Scouts and assassins, Ronar whispered, his breath forming clouds in the bitter, Air, not a true attack force. They mean to breach the walls and open the gates from within. Elisande nodded, her gloved hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Around them, concealed in the darkness, 30 of Blackmere's fighters waited for her. Signal. Not regular soldiers, but hunters and trackers accustomed to moving silently through forest and field. They expect us to be focused on the Chancellor and the main army, she murmured. A reasonable assumption. But a fatal mistake, Ronar replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. Elisande studied the approaching force with a tactician's eye. They move with purpose. Someone has told them of this route, of the guard rotations. Her gaze hardened. We have a traitor within our walls. Ronar's expression darkened at this confirmation of his earlier suspicions. One of the Chancellor's men, perhaps, or someone Dravek planted long ago. We will address that matter soon enough, Elisande decided. For now, we have more immediate concerns. She turned to the scout crouched beside them. The trap is prepared, the young woman nodded. Yes, my lady, just as you ordered. Elisande drew a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm of imminent battle settle over her. Then we wait for them to spring it. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they watched the intruders advance. The snowfall thickened, providing additional cover for both sides. Finally, the lead soldiers reached the narrow passage where a seeming weakness in Blackmere's defenses offered tempting access, a section of wall unpatrolled in the storm. Now, Elisande whispered. The scout beside her released a falcon's cry into the night. Immediately, hidden defenders pulled on concealed ropes, and the snowpack above the passage gave way in a controlled avalanche. The intruders' shouts of alarm were cut short as snow crashed down upon them, burying half their number instantly. Before the survivors could regroup, Blackmere's fighters emerged from the darkness, arrows finding targets with deadly precision. Take prisoners if possible, Elisande had instructed earlier. We need information. The skirmish was brief and decisive. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized. 15 of Dravek's men dead, 7 captured, the remainder fled into the storm. Blackmere had suffered no casualties, a testament to the effectiveness of Elisande's trap and the skill of her fighters. As the prisoners were led away and the dead collected for proper burial, Elisande insisted on honorable treatment, even for enemies. Ronar approached her, brushing snow from his cloak. An elegant solution, he observed, using the storm itself as a weapon. Nature can be a powerful ally when respected, she replied, scanning the battlefield with a practiced eye to ensure nothing had been overlooked. My first winter at Blackmere taught me that. Something flickered across Ronar's face, regret. Perhaps, at the mention of those early days when she had faced the harsh northern climate alone. Before he could respond, Commander Thorne joined them, his weathered face grave despite their victory. My lady, Sir Ronar, one of the prisoners, has information. He asks to speak with you directly. In the warmth of the castle's guardroom, a wounded southern soldier sat bound to a chair, his captain's insignia still visible on his snow-dampened uniform. Blood seeped through a bandage on his thigh, but his eyes were clear and alert as Elisande and Ronar entered. You fought well, the man acknowledged without preamble. Better than we expected. You were misinformed about Blackmere's defenses, Elisande replied evenly, studying him with a measuring gaze. A costly error for your men. The captain's expression hardened. The error was not ours. We were betrayed, as you have been. Ronar stepped forward, his scarred face intimidating in the torchlight. Explain yourself. My name is Captain Maris of Lord Dravek's personal guard, the man said, straightening despite his bonds. Our mission tonight was to infiltrate the castle and capture Lady Elisande, alive and unharmed. Those were our explicit orders. To what purpose? Elisande demanded, though she suspected the answer. To force Blackmere's surrender without a costly siege, Maris replied. But we were told the western approach would be clear, that guards would be diverted to the main gate because of the Chancellor's presence. Ronar and Elisande exchanged a significant look. The betrayal came from someone with intimate knowledge of Blackmere's defenses and access to their council discussions. Who provided this information? Ronar asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Captain Maris hesitated, weighing his options before responding. I was not privy to the source, but Lord Dravik spoke of our man in the Chancellor's retinue, who would ensure your capture. The implications settled heavily in the room. Not just a spy, but coordination between Dravik and someone in the royal delegation. There's more, Maris continued, an unexpected note of disgust entering his voice. Once you were captured, Lady Elisande, Lord Dravik planned to announce that Sir Ronar had orchestrated the kidnapping, that his return and apparent loyalty were merely a ruse to reclaim Blackmere for himself. Elisande's eyes widened at this revelation. A clever ploy, she acknowledged coldly. It would sow distrust among my supporters and provide justification for Dravik's attack. Why tell us this? Ronar demanded, suspicious of the captain's motives. Maris met his gaze steadily. Because I served your father, Sir Ronar, and I thought I served you. For 5 years, Lord Dravik claimed you had died in battle while leading a reckless charge, when I learned you had been his prisoner all that time. He shook his head in disgust. There is no honor in such deception. No honor in attacking a ruler who has served her people well. Elisande studied the man carefully, searching for signs of deception and finding none. Your loyalty to your sense of honor does you credit, Captain Mares. You will be treated with respect while in our custody. As they left the guardroom, Elisande's mind raced with the implications of this new information. The traitor had to be identified and neutralized before they could fully address the threats, both within and without Blackmere's walls. We must proceed carefully, she said to Ronar as they walked swiftly through the torch-lit corridors. If we act too openly, we may alert the spy. The Chancellor himself? Ronar suggested, his voice low. Elisande shook her head. Unlikely. He wouldn't risk direct involvement. One of his retinue, someone who could move freely through the castle without arousing suspicion. They reached her private study, a small chamber adjacent to the Great Hall where maps and documents related to Blackmere's defense were kept under lock and key. Once inside, with the door secured, Elisande turned to face Ronar directly. We need to identify the traitor quickly, she said, tension evident in her normally composed features. The main army will move against us tomorrow, regardless of the weather, once Dravik learns his infiltration attempt has failed. Ronar nodded grimly. We should call an emergency council meeting, but carefully select who attends. The fewer who know about tonight's events, the better chance we have of exposing the spy. Agreed. Only Thorne, Lady Margaret, and Lord Asher, our most trusted advisors. Elisande moved to her writing desk, pulling out a fresh parchment. I'll draft orders to heighten security around the Chancellor's quarters. We must monitor his communications without alerting him to our suspicions. As she wrote, Ronar watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. The strain of leadership was visible in the tight set of her shoulders, the shadows beneath her eyes. Yet her hand remained steady, her focus unwavering. You should rest, he said quietly. Even briefly. Tomorrow will test us all. Elisande glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. I've managed with less sleep in more dire circumstances. I don't doubt it, Ronar replied, but Blackmere needs its lady at full strength. She set down her quill, studying him with an unreadable expression. Your concern is noted, Sir Ronar, but unnecessary. Is it? He challenged gently. You've carried this burden alone for 5 years. Even now, with my return, you bear the weight of command, of every decision. Something vulnerable flickered across Elisande's face before she composed herself once more. It is my duty, my choice. Not alone, Ronar said, taking a step closer. Not anymore. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken emotions. Shared history, old wounds, and something new and fragile emerging from the ashes of their past. Before Elisande could respond, a sharp knock at the door broke the moment. Lady Margaret entered, her silver hair disheveled, her expression urgent. My lady Sir Ronar, forgive the interruption, but I've discovered something disturbing. What is it? Elisande asked, immediately alert. The Chancellor's personal secretary, Master Theo. I observed him tampering with the lock to the armory. When confronted, he fled. Our guards are searching for him now. Ronar's expression darkened. The traitor reveals himself. But not his full plan, Elisande cautioned. What would he want from the armory? The answer came in the form of a distant shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of steel against steel. Combat had erupted somewhere within the castle. The Western Gatehouse, Ronar realized, already moving toward the door. If he opens that gate, Dravik's remaining forces could enter unchallenged, Elisande finished, reaching for her sword. Quickly, they raced through the castle corridors, gathering guards as they went. The sounds of fighting grew louder as they approached the western gate, a smaller entrance primarily used for supply wagons, now the focus of an internal attack. The scene that greeted them was chaos. 3 of Blackmir's guards lay dead or wounded, while the Chancellor's secretary fought alongside 2 men wearing the royal insignia, clearly not loyal royal guards, but Dravik's men in disguise. They had nearly succeeded in opening the heavy gate, beyond which dark figures could be seen gathering in the snowy night. "Stop them!" Elisande commanded, her sword already drawn. The fight was swift but brutal. Ronar engaged the false royal, guards with the skill of a seasoned warrior, his movements economic and deadly despite his recent injuries. Elisande confronted Master Theo directly, her lighter blade flashing in the torchlight as she drove him back from the gate mechanism. "Surrender!" she commanded, backing the secretary against the wall. "Your plot is exposed." "You've already lost," Theo spat, desperation making him reckless as he lunged forward. "Blackmir falls tonight." His attack was predictable, fueled more by fear than skill. Elisande sidestepped neatly, her blade finding his sword arm with surgical precision. The secretary cried out, his weapon clattering to the stone floor as he clutched his bleeding limb. With the traitors subdued and the gate secured, Elisande turned to find Ronar standing over the bodies of the false guards, his own sword bloodied but his expression controlled. Their eyes met across the gatehouse, a moment of silent recognition passing between them, acknowledgement of how seamlessly they had worked together in the crisis. "Are you hurt?" Ronar asked, his gaze sweeping over her with concern. "No," Elisande replied, wiping her blade clean before sheathing it. "You?" He shook his head, a grim smile touching his scarred lips. They fought poorly for Dravik's elite. Commander Thorne arrived with reinforcements, quickly taking charge of the prisoners and securing the area. "The Chancellor?" he asked tersely. "Confined to his quarters until we determine the extent of his involvement," Elisande ordered. "Double the guard on all entrances and post archers on the walls. If Dravik has more forces nearby, they may attempt another breach." As the immediate crisis passed and the wounded were tended to, Elisande found herself standing with Ronar in the relative privacy of an alcove near the gatehouse. The night's events had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Not the combat itself, but how close they had come to disaster through betrayal. "You knew," Ronar said quietly, studying her face in the torchlight. "You suspected a traitor within our walls before tonight's attack." Elisande nodded wearily. "I've suspected since the Chancellor's arrival. The timing was too convenient. His knowledge of our defenses too precise. Yet you didn't share these suspicions, even with me," Ronar observed, a hint of hurt in his voice. She met his gaze directly. "I've learned caution through necessity, Ronar. Trust is a luxury I haven't been able to afford." Something shifted in his expression, understanding, perhaps, of the isolation her position had forced upon her. Without warning, he reached out, his calloused hand gently brushing a smudge of blood from her cheek. "Elisande," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "I know I have no right to ask for your trust. But know this, I would die before betraying you or Blackmir again." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his touch against her skin, something broke within Elisande in that moment, a wall carefully maintained for 5 long years. Before she could consider the consequences, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss born of shared danger, relief, and emotions too complex to name. For a heartbeat, Ronar froze in surprise. Then his arms encircled her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with equal fervor, years of separation and regret channeled into this unexpected moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Elisande saw her own wonder reflected in Ronar's eyes. Wonder that something thought dead could spark to life again in the midst of danger and betrayal. "I never thought," he began. "Nor I," she admitted softly. The moment hung between them, fragile and precious amid the harsh realities of their situation. Then duty reasserted itself as a guard approached to report that the Chancellor was demanding an audience. Reality returned like a cold wave. Tomorrow would bring battle, regardless of tonight's victory. Dravek's main force still threatened their borders, and the Crown's position remained hostile. Yet something fundamental had changed, not just between them personally, but in the very nature of Blackmir's defense. They were no longer a woman standing alone against overwhelming odds and a man seeking redemption for past failures. They had become something more powerful, partners united by shared purpose, mutual respect, and the first tentative flowering of renewed affection. As they walked side by side to confront the Chancellor, Elisande felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of their situation. For the first time in 5 years, she did not carry Blackmir's fate solely on her shoulders. For the first time since Ronar's return, she allowed herself to believe that his presence might be not just useful, but essential to the future she had fought so hard to build. The real battle still lay ahead, but now they would face it together. Dawn broke clear and cold over Blackmir, the storm having passed during the night to leave a pristine blanket of snow across the landscape. The beauty was deceptive. Beneath that peaceful white covering, the land was prepared for war. Trenches had been dug and camouflaged, stake pits constructed along likely approach routes, and oil barrels positioned at strategic points. Elisande stood on the highest tower of the castle, the bitter wind whipping at her cloak as she surveyed the preparations through a brass spyglass. "They come," she said simply as Ronar joined her, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He took the spyglass, scanning the southern horizon where dark columns of soldiers advanced through the snow-covered valley. Even at this distance, the enormity of the force was evident. Hundreds of men marching beneath the banners of various southern lords, with Lord Dravek's black and crimson wolf standard most prominent among them. 500 at least, Ronar confirmed grimly. Heavy cavalry on the flanks, foot soldiers in the center, archers behind. He lowered the spyglass, his expression tightening. "And siege engines. They've brought 3 trebuchets." Elisande nodded, having expected as much. "They mean to break our walls if they cannot breach our defenses directly." "The snow will slow the trebuchets," Ronar observed. "Difficult to position in these conditions. A small advantage, but we'll take what we can get." Elisande turned as Commander Thorn approached, his weathered face grave but composed. "All positions are ready, my lady," he reported. "The villagers have been moved to the inner keep, provisions distributed. Every capable fighter is armed and at their post." "And the Chancellor?" Elisande asked, her tone cooling noticeably. Thorn's expression hardened. "Secured in the East Tower under guard, as you ordered. He continues to protest his innocence in his secretary's treachery, yet offers no explanation for how 3 of Dravek's men infiltrated his retinue," Ronar added sardonically. The confrontation with Lord Chancellor Aldrich the previous night had been tense but inconclusive. The royal representative had expressed appropriate shock at his secretary's betrayal, condemning the actions while maintaining complete ignorance of the plot. Without direct evidence linking him to the attempted sabotage, Elisande had chosen to confine rather than accuse him, a political precaution that left options open for the aftermath, whatever it might bring. "We focus on survival first," Elisande decided, turning back to the approaching army. "Politics can wait until Blackmir is secure." The 3 descended from the tower to the castle's main courtyard, where Blackmir's fighters had assembled for final instructions. They were a diverse force, traditional soldiers in Blackmir's colors, village militia with less formal training but fierce determination, hunters and trappers skilled in forest combat, even stable hands and blacksmiths who had volunteered to defend their home. What they lacked in military precision, they made up for in courage and intimate knowledge of the terrain they defended. Elisande moved to address them, her voice carrying clearly in the cold morning air. She wore practical armor, a breastplate, crafted to her form, leather reinforced with steel at vulnerable points, a sword at her hip and a dagger at her belt. Not the ornate battle dress of a noble playing at war, but the functional protection of a leader who had proven herself in combat. Today, Blackmere faces its greatest test, she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. Our enemies believe we will fall because we are few against many. They believe we will surrender because we lack the protection of greater lords or the crown's favor. A murmur of defiance rippled through the gathered fighters. Elisande continued, her voice strengthening. But they misunderstand what Blackmere has become. We are not a collection of subjects bound by fear or obligation. We are a community forged through shared hardship, mutual respect, and common purpose. She moved among them as she spoke, making eye contact with individual fighters, acknowledging the blacksmith who had crafted her armor, the hunter who had taught her to track during her first difficult winter, the village elder whose wisdom had guided many of her early decisions. I ask you to fight today not for me, not for titles or lands, but for the home we have built together, for your families sheltered within these walls, for the right to determine our own future. Ronar watched from the side, struck by the transformation before him. The reserved, somewhat uncertain young woman he had left behind had become this commanding presence who inspired loyalty not through intimidation, but through genuine connection with her people. They followed her not because she was their lady by title, but because she had earned their trust through actions. Look to your left, to your right, Elisande continued. Remember who stands beside you. Today we are all Blackmere. Today we all hold the line. A cheer erupted from the assembled fighters, not the regimented response of professional soldiers, but the genuine roar of people defending what they loved. Elisande acknowledged it with a raised hand before turning to Commander Thorne. To your positions, she ordered. May the gods watch over you all. As the fighters dispersed to their assigned posts, Ronar approached Elisande, his expression a complex mixture of pride and concern. They would follow you into hell itself, he observed quietly. Let us hope it doesn't come to that, she replied, though the gravity of their situation was not lost on either of them. Despite their preparations, despite the courage of their defenders, the coming battle would extract a terrible price. I should join the Western defense, Ronar said, adjusting the sword at his hip. The valley approach is well covered, but if Dravek attempts another flanking maneuver— No, Elisande interrupted, her decision clearly already made. I need you with me at the main gate. Your knowledge of Dravek's tactics is too valuable to place at a secondary position. Ronar studied her face, sensing there was more to this assignment than tactical advantage. As you command, my lady. A hint of softness touched her expression at his formal address. After last night, I think, we are well past such formalities, Ronar. The reference to their unexpected kiss brought a rare warmth to his scarred features. Old habits, he acknowledged, though some new ones may be worth cultivating. Before she could respond, a horn blast from the watchtower signaled the enemy's approach to the outer perimeter. The moment for personal matters had passed. War had arrived at Blackmere's gates. The next hours unfolded in the controlled chaos of battle. Dravek's forces advanced methodically, testing Blackmere's defenses with probing attacks before committing to full engagement. The first wave fell to concealed pits and archer fire from the ridge positions. The second encountered barricades set ablaze with the stored oil, creating a wall of flame that forced them to seek alternate routes that channeled them into prepared killing grounds where Blackmere's defenders held the advantage of elevation and cover. From the gatehouse battlements, Elisande and Ronar coordinated the defense, adjusting tactics as the battle evolved. They worked in remarkable tandem, her intimate knowledge of Blackmere's strengths complementing his experience with large-scale warfare. When Dravek shifted his attack to the eastern wall, they were already moving reinforcements to meet the threat. When the first trebuchet was positioned to bombard the main gate, Elizond dispatched a small force of archers to harass the engineers, delaying its deployment. They're testing our flanks now, Ronar observed as midday approached, the sun high, but offering little warmth in the winter air. Searching for weakness. Elizond nodded, wiping sweat from her brow despite the cold. The initial attacks had been repulsed with minimal casualties for Blackmere, but Dravek still held numerical superiority. Time favored the attackers, who could rotate fresh troops into the battle while the defenders grew increasingly exhausted. We need to disrupt their command structure, she decided, studying the enemy formations through her spyglass. Their coordination is too effective. Dravek must be directing personally. Ronar took the spyglass, scanning the enemy lines until he focused on a position near the tree line where a group of mounted figures observed the battle. There, he said, pointing. The red pavilion. That's his standard. Elizond studied the position, calculating distances and angles. Out of bow range from our walls. He's being cautious. But not cautious enough, Ronar replied, a dangerous edge entering his voice. I know that position. The eastern forest path leads directly behind it, narrow and treacherous, but passable for a small, fast-moving force. Their eyes met, a silent communication passing between them, as both recognized the opportunity and the risk. A strike at Dravek himself could disrupt the entire southern command, but would require drawing fighters away from Blackmere's defenses for a dangerous sortie behind enemy lines. It's too risky, Elizond said finally, though reluctance colored her tone. We need every defender on the walls. Not every defender, Ronar countered. 20 of your best, the marsh hunters who accompanied me before. They know stealth. They know the terrain. His gray eyes held hers intently. And they know me. Elizonde hesitated, weighing the tactical advantage against the personal cost. The plan had merit, but sending Ronar directly against the man who had imprisoned and tortured him for 5 years carried emotional complications beyond the military calculation. This isn't about revenge, Ronar said quietly, reading her concern. This is about ending the battle before we lose more people. Before Blackmere pays a price it cannot afford. After a long moment, Elizond nodded sharply. Gather your 20. You leave within the hour. She gripped his arm, her fingers tight on his sleeve. But understand me, Ronar. I need you to return. Not just Blackmere, but I need you to return. The admission cost her pride, but after the previous night's moment of connection, pretense seemed pointless. Ronar covered her hand with his own, his expression solemn. I will come back to you, he promised. We have too much unfinished business for me to die today. The preparation for the sortie was swift and secretive, conducted away from the main battle to avoid alerting enemy observers. The 20 chosen fighters, mostly survivors of the Marsh mission with a few additions skilled in forest movement, gathered in the small eastern postern gate, lightly armored and armed for swift, silent combat. Elizond spoke briefly with each fighter, acknowledging their courage and reminding them of the mission's importance. When she reached Ronar, final preparations nearly complete, she found herself uncharacteristically lost for words. This isn't farewell, he said softly, sparing her the need to speak. It had better not be, she replied, finding her voice. I held Blackmere alone for 5 years. I can do it again if necessary, but I would rather not. A smile touched his scarred lips. After witnessing your leadership these past days, I have no doubt of your capabilities, my lady. But I intend to lighten your burden, not add to it by getting myself killed. Impulsively, Elizond reached up and touched his scarred cheek, a mirror to the gesture he had made the previous night. Be careful, she said simply. Be victorious. And return. As the small force slipped out through the postern gate and disappeared into the eastern forest, Elizond returned to the main battlements. The fighting had intensified, Dravek's forces launching coordinated attacks on multiple fronts. Commander Thorn directed the defense with practiced efficiency, but the strain on Blackmere's defenders was beginning to show. They've positioned the trebuchets, my lady, Thorn reported grimly. First volley expected within the hour. Elizond nodded, mentally calculating how long Ronar's mission would take to reach Dravek's position. Hold the walls at all costs. Relief may come from an unexpected quarter. Hours passed in the brutal rhythm of siege warfare. The first trebuchet stones crashed against Blackmere's outer wall, shaking the very foundations of the castle but failing to breach the ancient stone. Dravek's forces launched wave after wave of attacks, each repulsed but at increasing cost to the defenders. By mid-afternoon, Blackmere had suffered significant casualties, 20 dead, dozens wounded, and ammunition for the archers was running dangerously low. Elisande moved tirelessly among her people, directing reinforcements, encouraging the weary, personally binding wounds when healers were overwhelmed. Her presence was a talisman that kept despair at bay, her calm authority a reminder that Blackmere had overcome impossible odds before. Then, as the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, chaos erupted in the enemy camp. Distant shouts could be heard, followed by the unmistakable sound of combat from behind the southern lines. Plumes of smoke rose from 3 separate locations in the enemy encampment, and the disciplined attack formations began to waver as conflicting. Orders spread confusion through the ranks. Ronar, Elisande breathed, a fierce smile spreading across her face as she realized his sortie had succeeded. Raising her voice, she called to her defenders, "Now, while they're disorganized, archers concentrate fire on their center formation." Blackmere's response was immediate and devastating. Arrows rained down on the confused southern troops, while defenders at the main gate launched a limited sortie to drive back the nearest attackers. The momentum of battle shifted perceptibly as Dravek's forces struggled to respond to threats from both front and rear. From her position on the battlements, Elisande could see figures fighting near the Red Pavilion, where Dravek had established his command. Though too distant to identify individuals, the ferocity of the combat suggested Ronar had found his target. She forced herself to focus on directing Blackmere's defense, trusting him to complete his mission while she secured their home. As twilight approached, bringing the promise of deepening cold, a rider broke from the chaos of the southern lines and galloped toward Blackmere's gate under a flag of truce. Commander Thorn ordered archers to hold their fire but maintain readiness as the messenger approached. "Lady Elisande of Blackmere," the rider called, reining in his lathered horse just beyond arrow range. "Lord Dravek requests a parley." A ripple of surprise passed through the defenders. Elisande exchanged a meaningful glance with Thorn before responding. "Lord Dravek is welcome to approach under the flag of truce with 2 guards only," she called back. "We will hear his terms." As the messenger departed to deliver this response, Thorn moved closer to Elisande, his voice low with concern. Trap, my lady?" "Perhaps," she acknowledged. But Dravek would not request parley unless his position had become untenable. Her gaze returned to the distant command post where the fighting appeared to have ceased. "Prepare for any contingency, but let us hear what he offers." The gates of Blackmere opened just wide enough to admit 3 riders. Lord Dravek himself, flanked by 2 guards. The southern lord's once resplendent armor was dented and bloodied, and a fresh wound marred his face from temple to jaw, an echo of the scar he had given Ronar years before. His expression was a mask of barely controlled fury as he dismounted before Elisande, who had come down from the battlements to meet him in the courtyard. "Lady Elisande," he acknowledged stiffly, his hand never straying far from his sword hilt. "It seems we have reached an impasse." "Have we, Lord Dravek?" she replied coolly. "From my perspective, your attack has failed. Your command structure is in disarray, and your position grows more precarious by the hour as darkness approaches." Dravek's jaw tightened visibly. "My forces still outnumber yours. Your walls may yet fall to my siege engines." "At what cost?" Elisande challenged. "How many more men are you willing to sacrifice? The southern lords followed you because you promised an easy victory over a woman they believed weak. How long will their loyalty last as their sons and brothers die in the snow?" Before Dravek could respond, movement at the gate drew all eyes. Ronar entered, leading the survivors of his sortie force, 16 of the original 20, a remarkable rate of return from such a dangerous mission. Blood stained his armor, though whether his own or his enemies was unclear. His expression as he regarded Dravek was coldly triumphant. Sir Ronar, Dravek acknowledged, unable to entirely mask his shock at seeing his former prisoner now standing as a defender of Blackmere. Reports of your death were clearly premature, as were reports of your victory, Ronar replied evenly, moving to stand beside Elisande. Your army is broken, Dravek. Your allies retreat even now. Look to your flanks and see the truth, all. Eyes turned to the battlefield beyond Blackmere's walls, where indeed the southern forces had begun a disorganized withdrawal, abandoning siege equipment and wounded in their haste to distance themselves from what had become a costly defeat. Dravek Swao, face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is not over, he snarled. The Crown's representative conspired in attempted murder and sabotage. Elisande interrupted, her voice carrying to all within the courtyard. Do you truly believe the king will support your claim once that evidence is presented? For a moment, it seemed Dravek might attempt something desperate. His hand twitched toward his sword, his eyes darting between Elisande and Ronar with naked hatred. But surrounded by Blackmere's defenders, his position was hopeless, and some vestige of self-preservation prevailed. What are your terms? He asked, the words seeming to physically pain him. Withdraw beyond Blackmere's borders, Elisande stated firmly. Return all seized properties and goods to the villages you have raided, and acknowledge before witnesses that your imprisonment of Sir Ronar was unlawful and treasonous. And in, return, Dravek demanded. You leave with your life, Ronar answered simply, which is more than you granted me for 5 years. The battle for Blackmere was over. As night fell, the southern army retreated in disarray, their cohesion shattered by the combination of Blackmere's stalwart defense and Ronar's decisive strike at their command. Lord Dravek departed under escort to the border, his power and reputation in tatters, his allies already distancing themselves from his failed campaign. In the great hall of Blackmere Castle, the defenders gathered to tend wounds, share meals, and celebrate their unlikely victory. The cost had been significant, 32 dead in total, scores wounded, but compared to the complete destruction they had faced, it was a price paid willingly for their continued freedom. Elisande moved among them, thanking each fighter personally, comforting the injured, mourning with those who had lost companions. This, more than any speech or ceremony, demonstrated why they had fought so fiercely for Blackmere and its lady, not obligation but genuine connection to a leader who saw them as individuals worthy of respect. Near midnight, when the wounded had been tended and the immediate aftermath of battle addressed, Elisande finally allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She stood on the western battlements, watching the last of the enemy campfires winking out in the distance as the southern forces continued their retreat. Should you not be resting? Ronar's voice came from behind her, gentle despite its depth. She turned to find him approaching, his armor removed, but the evidence of battle still visible in the new cuts and bruises that marked his face and hands. He moved with the careful deliberation of one managing significant pain, though he had refused the healer's attention until others were treated. I could ask the same of you, she replied, noting the exhaustion etched in his features. He joined her at the battlement, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed out at the moonlit landscape. I've discovered I'm not particularly skilled at celebration, he admitted. Too many years in solitude, perhaps. Or perhaps too much unprocessed experience, Elisande suggested quietly. You faced him today, the man who stole 5 years of your life. That cannot be easily set aside, even in victory. Ronar's expression tightened momentarily. When I stood before him, sword in hand, I thought I would feel triumph, satisfaction. He shook his head slowly. Instead, I felt nothing but a deep weariness, as if his punishment, deserved though it was, could never restore what was taken. Some losses cannot be recovered, Elisande agreed, her gaze distant. We can only move forward from where we stand. A comfortable silence fell between them, the shared understanding of two people who had endured separate hardships yet emerged with similar wisdom. Finally, Ronar turned to face her directly. Where do we stand, Elisande? He asked simply. You and I? The question hung in the cold night air, laden with all the complexity of their shared past and uncertain future. Elisande considered her answer carefully, honoring the moment's importance. "On new ground," she replied finally. "Neither where we began nor where we might have been without the years between. But perhaps—" She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "Perhaps somewhere with greater possibility than either." Ronar's scarred face softened, hope kindling in his gray eyes. "I would explore that possibility," he said quietly, "if you would permit it." In answer, Elisande reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture more intimate than any kiss. Together they stood on the battlements of the home they had defended, a home that, like their relationship, had been broken, rebuilt, and emerged stronger than before. The battle was won. The future, unwritten but full of promise, stretched before them. Spring arrived at Blackmere with a gentleness that seemed to deliberately contrast the brutal winter that had preceded it. Tender green shoots pushed through soil still bearing the scars of battle, and birds returned to build nests in the repaired walls of the fortress. 3 months had passed since Lord Dravek's defeat, months of rebuilding, healing, and cautious diplomatic maneuvering as Blackmere secured its position in the aftermath of victory. Elisande stood in the newly replanted herb garden, watching as Lady Margaret instructed young apprentices in the identification and uses of medicinal plants. The older woman's expertise had saved countless lives during and after the battle, transforming the Great Hall into an efficient healing ward where wounded defenders and even captured enemy soldiers received equal care. "The yarrow is coming in strong this year," Lady Margaret observed as Elisande approached. "Nature's wisdom, providing abundantly what we needed most during the fighting. Nature heals herself, as do we," Elisande replied, kneeling to examine the delicate white flowers. The garden had been one of her first projects after assuming control of Blackmere, transforming an unused courtyard into a practical source of healing herbs and kitchen spices. Now it served as a symbol of renewal, of life continuing despite the shadow of recent conflict. "The delegation from the capital arrives today," Lady Margaret said, dismissing her apprentices with gentle instructions before turning her full attention to Elisande. "Are you prepared for what they might bring?" Elisande straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "As prepared as possible. The evidence against Lord Chancellor Aldrich is irrefutable. His secretary's confession, the forged documents found in his quarters, the testimonies of Captain Mares and others. Yet the Crown rarely admits error," the older woman cautioned. "They may seek to save face rather than deliver justice." "Then we will negotiate from strength," Elisande replied with quiet confidence. "Blackmere stands secure, our alliances with neighboring territories strengthened by our victory. Even the king must recognize the wisdom of accommodation rather than continued conflict." As they walked from the garden toward the castle proper, Elisande's thoughts turned to the diplomatic complexities that had followed their unlikely triumph. Lord Chancellor Aldrich remained confined at Blackmere, his protestations of innocence having given way to sullen silence as evidence of his complicity with Dravek mounted. The king, faced with the embarrassment of his representative's treachery, had initially responded with cold silence. But as Blackmere's account of events spread, supported by testimonies from captured southern lords and the statements of Captain Mares, the royal position had gradually shifted toward grudging acknowledgement. Today's delegation represented the first formal response from the capital. Its composition and message would reveal whether the crown sought reconciliation or continued opposition. "And Sir Ronar?" Lady Margaret asked, her tone deliberately casual, though her shrewd eyes missed. "Nothing. How does he fare with the prospect of royal judgment on his imprisonment?" Elisande's expression softened slightly at the mention of Ronar. "He concerns himself more with Blackmere's future than with his past grievances, though I believe he would welcome official recognition of the injustice he suffered." The older woman smiled knowingly. "He concerns himself with more than just Blackmere's future, I think." A faint blush touched Elisande's cheeks, but she did not deny the gentle observation. The months since the battle had seen a gradual, careful rebuilding of trust between herself and Ronar, Not a return to their former relationship, which had been distant and formal even before his disappearance, but the emergence of something new and surprisingly tender. They moved cautiously, both aware of old wounds not fully healed, yet increasingly drawn to the unexpected connection that had emerged in the crucible of shared danger. "We take each day as it comes," Elisande said simply, a private smile touching her lips. They reached the main courtyard as a horn blast announced riders at the outer gate. Commander Thorne approached from the training yards, where he had been drilling new recruits to replace those lost in the battle. "They've arrived. Earlier than expected," he reported. "Royal standard and the king's personal seal on the lead rider." Elisande nodded, mentally shifting from private thoughts to the formal role required of her. "Receive them with full honors. I'll meet them in the Great Hall." As the commander hurried to organize an appropriate welcome, Elisande made her way to her chambers to change into more formal attire. She found Alara already waiting, a gown of deep blue velvet laid out on the bed alongside the delicate bronze circlet that had become her symbol of authority. "The blue brings out your eyes, my lady," Alara observed as she helped Elisande dress, "and reminds them that you are of noble blood yourself, despite what some at court might whisper." Elisande smiled at her handmaiden's protective loyalty. "Today is about more than my personal standing, Alara. It's about securing Blackmere's future, all our futures." Once properly attired, Elisande descended to the Great Hall, where Ronar awaited her near the entrance. He too had dressed formally for the occasion, though he wore practical riding leathers rather than courtly finery. The past months had been kind to him. Regular meals and training had restored much of his former physical strength, while purposeful work rebuilding Blackmere had eased some of the shadows in his eyes. The scar that marked his face remained prominent, but no longer seemed a disfigurement. Rather, it had become simply a part of him, a visual reminder of survival against impossible odds. "You look like a queen," he said quietly as she approached, admiration evident in his gaze. "Let us hope the king's representatives don't share that assessment," she replied with dry humor. "One battle is enough for this year." His scarred lips curved in a smile. "I've always admired your strategic thinking." They took their positions at the head of the hall, Elisande seated in the carved chair that served as Blackmere's throne, Ronar standing at her right hand. Commander Thorne, Lady Margaret, Lord Asher, and other key members of Blackmere's council arranged themselves in a formal semicircle, presenting a united front to the approaching royal delegation. The great doors swung open to admit 6 riders, led by a dignified man in his 50s bearing the gold chain of a royal justice. Behind him rode knights in the king's colors, their expressions carefully neutral as they surveyed the hall and its occupants. "Lady Elisande of Blackmere," the lead rider announced, dismounting and approaching the dais with a formal bow. "I am Lord Justice Kendrick, sent by His Majesty King Edmund to address the matter of recent conflicts and allegations concerning this territory." "Lord Justice," Elisande acknowledged with a regal nod. "Blackmere welcomes you and stands ready to provide full accounting of these matters." The formalities of welcome were observed, bread and salt offered, quarters arranged, horses stabled. Only when these rituals of hospitality were complete did the serious discussions begin in the privacy of Blackmere's council chamber. Lord Justice Kendrick came directly to the point once they were seated around the oak table. "His Majesty finds himself in an uncomfortable position," he began, his tone measured. "Evidence suggests his trusted chancellor engaged in conspiracy with Lord Drevec against a loyal territory, yet publicly acknowledging such treachery would undermine confidence in the crown's appointments." "More uncomfortable than 5 years of unlawful imprisonment?" Ronar asked, his voice deceptively mild, though his eyes had hardened. Kendrick inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. "Your suffering has been considered, Sir Ronar, as has Lady Elisande's remarkable stewardship of Blackmere during your absence." He removed a sealed document from his satchel, placing it on the table. "The king offers the following resolution." Elisande took the document, breaking the royal seal and reading its contents carefully. As she did, her expression remained composed, though those who knew her well might have detected the slight widening of her eyes in surprise. "The king is generous," she said finally, passing the document to Ronar. "The king is practical," Kendrick corrected with the ghost of a smile, "and prefers allies to enemies, particularly capable ones." Ronar's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise as he read the royal decree. This grants Blackmere status as a semi-autonomous territory, with expanded borders including the disputed marshlands. "And formal recognition of joint rulership," Kendrick added, his gaze moving between Elisande and Ronar. "The king acknowledges both Sir Ronar's rightful claim by birth and Lady Elisande's earned authority through stewardship. A unique arrangement, but one that honors both tradition and merit." "And Lord Chancellor Aldrich?" Elisande asked, cutting to a critical point not addressed in the document. Kendrick's expression tightened slightly. "The Chancellor has been recalled to the capital to face private inquiry. He will not return to public office." "A gentle punishment for treason," Ronar observed darkly, "but accompanied by substantial compensation to Blackmere for damages sustained," Kendrick countered, indicating a section of the decree that specified a significant financial settlement. "And public recognition of the injustice you suffered, Sir Ronar." The negotiations continued through the afternoon, addressing specific points of territory, trade rights, and military obligations. Throughout, Elisande and Ronar worked in remarkable tandem, each supporting the other's positions while offering complementary perspectives. By evening, a modified agreement had been reached, one that secured Blackmere's future while maintaining appropriate ties to the crown. As the formal discussions concluded and arrangements were made for a celebratory meal, Elisande found a moment, alone with Ronar in a quiet alcove off the main corridor. Semi-autonomous status, she mused, still processing the unexpected turn of events. More than we could have reasonably hoped for. "A recognition of strength," Ronar replied. "The king is shrewd enough to prefer you as an ally, rather than a potential rival." "Us," Elisande corrected gently. "The decree names us both as rulers of Blackmere." Something vulnerable flickered across Ronar's scarred features. "Does that arrangement meet with your approval, my lady? After 5 years of sole authority, sharing power must seem a step backward." Elisande studied him, seeing beyond the formal question to the deeper uncertainty beneath. Despite their growing closeness in recent months, neither had directly addressed the fundamental question of what their relationship might become, personally or politically. "It depends," she said carefully, "on whether we would rule as we once were, distant allies in a political arrangement, or as something else entirely." Ronar took a step closer, his voice dropping to ensure their privacy. "What we once were was a mistake of my making," he said with quiet intensity. "I didn't know how to be a husband then, only a lord, a warrior. I kept my distance because I feared closeness, vulnerability." His scarred hand rose hesitantly, as if to touch her face, then lowered again. "I've had 5 years of solitude to consider my errors. And I've had 5 years of leadership to discover my strength," Elisande replied, her amber eyes holding his gray ones steadily. "I am not the same woman you left behind, Ronar. I will never again be that uncertain girl who looked to others for approval or direction. I would not wish you to be," he said with surprising fervor. "The woman you've become is—" He paused, searching for adequate words. "Extraordinary, formidable, beautiful in ways I was too blind to see before." The naked admiration in his voice brought warmth to Elisande's cheeks. But she maintained her composure. This moment was too important for hasty emotions or easy platitudes. "If we are to rule together," she said deliberately, "it must be as true partners, equal in authority, in respect, in purpose." "And if we were to be more than just ruling partners?" Ronar asked, taking another step closer. "What then?" The question hung between them, fraught with possibility. Elisande felt her heart quicken despite her resolve to remain measured and thoughtful. "Then we would need to rebuild what was broken," she answered softly. "Not as it was before, but as something new. Something chosen rather than arranged." Ronar nodded, understanding the distinction and its importance. "I would choose you, Elisande," he said simply, "not for political advantage or alliance, but for yourself, for the remarkable woman you are. The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his expression, so different from the cold, distant man she had married, touched something deep within Elisande. In that moment, she allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing between them since his return. Not just respect or cautious alliance, but genuine affection. Perhaps even the beginnings of love, not the idealized fantasy of a young bride, but the deeper, more complex bond of two people who had survived hardship and found unexpected strength in each other. "We have time," she said gently, reaching out to briefly touch his scarred cheek. "Time to discover what we might become together." That evening, Blackmere hosted a formal feast to celebrate the royal decree and honor the king's representatives. The great hall glowed with candlelight, music filled the air, and for the first time since before the battle, the atmosphere was truly festive rather than merely relieved. Elisande and Ronar presided together at the high table, their formal unity, a visible representation of Blackmere's new status. Yet, those close to them noticed subtle changes in their interaction, a warmth in their exchanged glances, a natural harmony in their movements, an occasional brush of hands that lingered a moment longer than necessary. As the meal concluded and the celebration continued with music and dancing, Lord Justice Kendrick approached their table, his expression thoughtful. "I must confess, Lady Elisande, Sir Ronar," he said, keeping his voice low for privacy. "When I was assigned this mission, I expected to find Blackmere divided, a returned husband and an established wife competing for authority. Instead, I find remarkable unity. The king will be pleased." "Blackmere has always thrived on unexpected strengths," Elisande replied diplomatically. "Indeed." Kendrick's shrewd eyes moved between them, though I wonder if I might offer a personal observation beyond my official capacity. At their nod of permission, he continued, "In my years as royal justice, I've witnessed many political marriages, many power-sharing arrangements. Few survive crisis. Fewer still emerge stronger from it." A genuine smile softened his formal demeanor. "Whatever you have found here, whatever you are building together, it is rare and worth preserving." Later, when the feast had ended and guests retired to their quarters, Elisande and Ronar walked together in the moonlit garden where healing herbs now flourished where once there had been only frozen ground. Neither spoke immediately, content in the peaceful silence after a day of diplomatic intensity. The justice spoke true. Ronar said finally, his voice quiet in the night air. "What we have found here is rare. A second chance few are granted." Elisande nodded, her face silvered in the moonlight. "We have both traveled difficult paths to reach this point. Paths that might have broken lesser spirits," he agreed. Then, with careful deliberation, he took her hand in his. "Elisande, I make you this vow, not as a political arrangement, not as duty, but as a choice freely made. I will stand beside you as equal partner in all things for all days granted us." The simple sincerity of his words touched her more deeply than any formal ceremony or legal decree. In this quiet garden, away from the politics and positions that had shaped their lives, they were simply a man and woman choosing each other despite all odds. "And I choose you, Ronar," she replied softly. "Not as the man you were, nor for the title you carry, but for who you have become, for the partner you might be." Under the watchful moon, they sealed this private renewal with a kiss, not the desperate adrenaline-fueled connection of battle's aftermath, but a gentle promise of possibility, of healing, of a future neither could have imagined in the dark days of separation, yet now stood before them, unexpected and precious. Blackmere had endured, transformed by crisis into something stronger than before. And in the heart of that transformation, two people once bound by duty discovered the rarer, more enduring bond of chosen love. 5 years passed, like the changing seasons, each with its own challenges and triumphs, each leaving Blackmere stronger than before. What had begun as a forgotten northern outpost had blossomed into a prosperous territory known throughout the kingdom for its fair governance, innovative trade practices, and fierce independence. On a warm summer morning, Elisande stood on the battlements that had once been crumbling stone, now reinforced and adorned with the phoenix emblem that had become Blackmere's recognized symbol. At 48, time had added silver threads to her chestnut hair and fine lines around her eyes, but these only enhanced her natural dignity. She wore a simple gown of deep green, practical yet elegant, much like the realm she had built. Below in the courtyard, a group of children practiced with wooden swords under the watchful eye of Commander Thorne, now gray-haired but still straight-backed and formidable. Among them was 12-year-old Lily, the same child Elisande had rescued from the burning building in Harlow's Mill years ago. The girl moved with natural grace, her technique already showing promise that had earned Thorne's grudging praise. "She reminds me of you," came Ronar's voice as he joined Elisande at the parapet. "Determined, fearless, unwilling to accept limitations." Elisande smiled, leaning slightly into her husband's solid presence beside her. The years had been kind to Ronar as well. At 50, his face remained strong and vital, his body hardened by regular training rather than the ravages of imprisonment. The scar that bisected his face had faded somewhat, becoming as much a part of him as his gray eyes, or the silver now liberally streaked through his dark hair. "Lily has a warrior's heart," Elisande agreed, watching the girl execute a perfect parry against a boy nearly twice her size. "Though I hope her battles will be fought in council chambers rather than on bloody fields." "Peace has served Blackmere well," Ronar acknowledged, his gaze sweeping over the expanded castle grounds where new buildings had risen to accommodate their growing community. "Though I sometimes think we've grown almost too prosperous for our own good." Elisande laughed softly. "Says the man who negotiated the Eastern trade agreement that doubled our treasury." "A necessary evil," he replied with mock seriousness. "Someone had to counter your tendency to invest every coin in schools and healing houses." This gentle teasing reflected the comfortable partnership they had developed, each recognizing the other's strengths, each balancing the other's tendencies. What had begun as cautious cooperation had deepened over the years into profound respect and genuine love, surprising them both with its intensity and durability. Their reminiscence was interrupted by the approach of Lord Asher, now Blackmere's chief diplomat. In his early 30s, he had grown from an uncertain young noble into a skilled negotiator whose quiet wisdom had proven invaluable in maintaining Blackmere's delicate position between independence and fealty to the crown. "My lord, my lady," he greeted them with a respectful bow. "The preparations for tomorrow's midsummer council are complete. 42 representatives from the villages and allied territories have confirmed their attendance." "Thank you, Asher," Elisande replied. "And the special arrangements we discussed?" "In place, my lady. The central square has been prepared exactly as you requested." Ronar raised a questioning eyebrow as the young lord departed. "Special arrangements? You've been unusually secretive about this particular council meeting." Elisande's lips curved in a mysterious smile. 5 years since the royal decree recognizing our joint rulership. 10 years since the battle that secured Blackmere's future. I thought such anniversaries deserved appropriate commemoration. "Should I be concerned?" Ronar asked, knowing his wife's penchant for sometimes elaborate public gestures. "Not concerned," she assured him, her eyes warm with affection. Perhaps prepared to be surprised. Before he could press for details, they were interrupted by the arrival of Ilara, now Elisande's chief of household, rather than merely her handmaiden. The young woman had blossomed under Elisande's mentorship into a capable administrator who oversaw the castle's daily operations with quiet efficiency. "My lady, the delegation from Oakvale has arrived early," she reported, "and they've brought quite unexpected guests. Lady Margaret's grandchildren, including the infant twins no one has seen yet." "Wonderful news," Elisande replied, genuine pleasure lighting her features. Lady Margaret, now in her 70s, had retired to her family lands in Oakvale 3 years prior, though she still served as an advisor when her health permitted. The arrival of twin granddaughters had been joyful news for the woman who had stood by Elisande's side through Blackmere's darkest days. "I'll greet them personally," Elisande decided. "Ronar, will you join me?" Together they descended from the battlements to the main courtyard, their movements naturally synchronized after years of partnership. As they walked, People bowed or nodded respectfully, not with the fearful deference shown to typical nobles, but with the genuine regard earned through just governance and shared hardship. Lord Asher has grown into his position admirably, Ronar observed as they crossed the courtyard. Hard to remember the nervous young man who first pledged to Blackmere during that difficult winter. Most of our people have grown beyond what circumstances might have predicted, Elisande replied thoughtfully. Given opportunity and purpose, people reveal strengths they themselves might never have discovered otherwise. Ronar's hand found hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her slender ones in a gesture that had become habitual over the years. Including us, he said quietly. The simple statement carried layers of meaning between them, acknowledgement of how far they had come from the distant, arranged marriage of their youth, of how adversity had forged them into stronger versions of themselves, of how their unexpected reunion had opened possibilities neither would have dared imagine. Especially us, Elisande agreed softly. The great hall of Blackmere Castle, once echoing and sparse, now hummed with activity as final preparations for the Midsummer Council continued. Tapestries depicting Blackmere's history, including stylized scenes of Elisande's defense of Oakvale and the decisive battle against Dravek's forces, adorned walls once bare save for ancient weapons. Long tables were being arranged in a circular pattern rather than the traditional hierarchical rows, another of Elisande's innovations that encouraged equal voice among all representatives. Lady Margaret awaited them near the hearth, her once silver hair now snow-white but her posture still remarkably straight for her years. Beside her stood a young woman holding two swaddled infants, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. "My lady, my lord," Margaret greeted them warmly. "May I present my granddaughter Elena and her daughters, Elise and Isabeau, 2 months old today." Elisande approached with genuine delight, bending to examine the sleeping infants. "They're beautiful, Margaret, perfect little miracles. And already showing signs of their grandmother's formidable will," Elena added with affectionate exasperation. "Neither sleeps unless the other does, and both demand attention simultaneously." "The foundation of effective negotiation," Ronar observed with dry humor. "Coordinated demands." Lady Margaret laughed, the sound bringing back memories of countless council meetings where her practical wisdom had guided decisions both large and small. "I've been telling Elena that twins are a blessing in disguise. They learn to share and compromise from their first breath. Much like effective rulers," Elisande remarked, exchanging a meaningful glance with Ronar. As the day progressed and more delegates arrived for the following day's council, Elisande and Ronar moved through their duties with the practiced ease of long partnership. They greeted village elders and trade representatives, settled minor disputes before they could disrupt the gathering, and ensured that Blackmere's legendary hospitality was extended to all. That evening, they dined privately in their chambers, a luxury they permitted themselves rarely, given their commitment to accessibility. A simple meal of roasted pheasant, fresh bread, and summer berries was laid out near the hearth, where a small fire warded off the surprising chill that had descended with twilight. "I received a letter from the capital today," Ronar mentioned, as they ate. "Lord Kendrick sends his regards. The good justice has been a valuable ally," Elisande acknowledged. "Has the king finally appointed him to the royal council as he deserves?" Ronar nodded. "Officially announced last month. He specifically mentioned that Blackmere's governance model has influenced some of his proposals for provincial administration." A satisfied smile touched Elisande's lips. "So our unconventional approach has become worthy of emulation? How times change. The greatest victory is often won without swords," Ronar observed, refilling their wine cups. "Ideas outlast armies." They fell into comfortable conversation about the upcoming council, discussing various proposals and potential points of contention. This easy exchange of thoughts had become one of the foundations of their partnership, each respecting the other's perspective, neither dominating the discourse. As the evening deepened and candles burned low, their conversation drifted to more personal matters. Ronar studied his wife's profile in the firelight, struck anew by the quiet strength that had drawn him to her since his return. 10 years, he said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stood in the great hall, returning to a home transformed and a wife I barely recognized. Elisande turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting the dancing flames. And sometimes it feels like another lifetime. The woman I was then, the man you were. Do you ever wonder, Ronar asked carefully, what might have been if I had never left? If those 5 years had unfolded differently? It was a question they rarely addressed directly, preferring to focus on the present rather than dwell on paths not taken. But tonight, with anniversaries looming and memories close to the surface, it seemed natural to consider the strange twists of fate that had shaped their journey. Elisande considered the question thoughtfully. I used to wonder that frequently, she admitted. During those first difficult years alone, I imagined countless scenarios, some where you returned quickly, some where you had never left at all. She reached across the table to touch his scarred cheek gently. But now, I find I cannot truly wish our path had been different. Even knowing the cost? Ronar asked, covering her hand with his own. The loneliness you endured, the pain of my imprisonment. Even then, she confirmed softly. For without those hardships, we would not be who we are now. I would never have discovered my own strength. You might never have recognized what truly mattered beyond duty and honor. Blackmere itself would be a shadow of what it has become. Ronar nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. From suffering, growth. From separation, appreciation of togetherness. Precisely, Elisande agreed. Though I would not wish to repeat the experience, she added with a wry smile. The following day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the Midsummer Council. By mid-morning, the central square of Blackmere was filled with representatives from across the territory, village elders in their best clothes, merchants in practical but fine attire, allied nobles in more formal garb. All gathered in the circular arrangement that had become traditional for Blackmere's governance meetings, symbolizing the equal voice granted to all regardless of birth or station. Elisande and Ronar arrived together, dressed in complementary shades of Blackmere blue. They moved to the center of the circle where 2 carved chairs awaited them, not elevated on a dais as traditional thrones would be, but level with the gathering, another visual representation of their governance philosophy. The council proceeded through its agenda with the efficiency born of years of practice. Trade agreements were reviewed, disputes settled, new initiatives proposed and debated. Throughout, Elisande and Ronar guided rather than dictated, their subtle exchanges of glances and occasional whispered consultations demonstrating their seamless partnership. As the sun reached its zenith, Elisande rose from her seat, signaling a departure from the planned agenda. A ripple of curiosity passed through the gathered representatives. Friends and allies of Blackmere, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the square. 10 years ago, many of you stood with us against those who sought to destroy what we had built together. 5 years ago, our unique governance was formally recognized by the Crown. Today, we mark these anniversaries not with speeches about past glories, but with a vision for our future. At her gesture, Lord Asher and Alara unveiled a large model positioned at the edge of the square, an architectural representation of expanded buildings surrounding a central structure that resembled a great hall, but with significant differences from traditional designs. The Blackmere Commons, Elisande announced, indicating the model. A place where knowledge is freely shared, where any person regardless of birth may come to learn the arts of governance, trade, healing, or scholarship. A permanent council, hall where representatives from every village and allied territory may meet in equality. A repository for records and wisdom to guide future generations. A murmur of interest and approval spread through the gathering. Ronar stood to join his wife, his expression reflecting genuine surprise. This had clearly been developed without his knowledge. Construction begins next month, Elisande continued, funded by a portion of trade revenues set aside these past 5 years. But the true foundation of the commons will not be stone or timber, but the collective wisdom of all who call Blackmere home. She turned to Ronar then, a tender smile softening her formal demeanor. My husband and co-ruler did not know of this project, a rare secret I've managed to keep, she added, drawing appreciative laughter from the crowd. For it is as much a gift to him as to our people, a testament to the belief that leadership is not about power wielded from above, but wisdom rising from shared purpose. Ronar's scarred face registered emotion rarely displayed so openly: surprise, gratitude, and profound pride. A worthy legacy, he said, his deep voice carrying to all present, and one that honors the true spirit of what Blackmere has become. The council concluded with a feast that spread from the square into the surrounding streets, becoming a celebration that included all of Blackmere's residents. As evening approached, Elisande and Ronar slipped away from the festivities, walking together along the path that followed the castle's outer wall. "The Commons," Ronar said, shaking his head in amazement. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the royal decree, in truth," Elisande admitted, "though the specific design has evolved considerably. Do you truly approve?" "Approve?" He stopped walking to face her directly. "Elisande, it's brilliant. A physical embodiment of everything we've worked toward: shared governance, education, preservation of knowledge." She smiled, relieved despite her outward confidence. "I feared you might think it too ambitious, too costly. After watching you transform a crumbling outpost into a thriving territory, after seeing you face down armies and outmaneuver royal politicians," Ronar laughed softly, "I would hesitate to label anything as beyond your capabilities, my lady." They continued walking as twilight deepened, eventually reaching the small garden where, 5 years earlier, they had exchanged private vows of partnership that went beyond their original marriage arrangement. Now, as then, the fragrance of herbs and summer blooms filled the air as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. 10 years ago, I returned to a fortress prepared for war, Ronar reflected, his voice quiet in the evening stillness. Now I walk in a prosperous realm at peace, beside a woman whose strength I once foolishly underestimated, and I once stood alone, certain that solitude was the price of independence, Elisande replied, turning to face him. Now I understand that true strength lies in choosing the right allies, the right partners. She reached for his hands, her expression open and vulnerable in a way few ever witnessed. The right companion for the journey. Ronar brought her hands to his lips, kissing them with reverence. "You saved me," he said simply. "Not just from imprisonment, but from the man I was, cold, distant, unable to recognize what truly mattered." "We saved each other," Elisande corrected, gently. "And in doing so, built something neither of us could have created alone." Above them, the first stars of evening shimmered like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. From the distant square, music and laughter drifted on the warm breeze, sounds of the celebration continuing, of a community thriving under their joint protection. "What do you see when you look to the future now?" Ronar asked, drawing her close. Elisande rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I see Blackmere continuing to grow and prosper. I see the Commons filled with voices debating ideas worth pursuing. I see Lily and others of her generation taking up the responsibilities of leadership when our time has passed. And us?" he prompted softly. She smiled, contentment warming her voice. "I see us growing old together, watching what we've built flourish around us. I see quiet evenings by the fire and lively council meetings. I see a love that came to us unexpectedly, after hardship and separation, proving more enduring than either of us dared hope." Ronar tightened his arms around her, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of her vision. "From abandonment to abundance," he murmured. "From solitude to partnership. You built a kingdom from nothing, Elisande." "We built it," she corrected, lifting her face to his, "and it was never nothing, only waiting for the right hands to shape it, the right hearts to guide it." As twilight deepened into true night, the Lord and Lady of Blackmere remained in their private garden, two figures silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Around them, the realm they had forged together, through hardship, separation, reunion, and renewal, continued its celebration, secure in the knowledge that its future rested in the hands of leaders who had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength comes not from power imposed, but from love freely given and received. A kingdom built from nothing had become a legacy for the ages, and two hearts, once divided by circumstance, had found their way to a union more powerful than either could have imagined. A love story written not in grand gestures or flowery declarations, but in the patient daily work of building something meant to endure.